Hey guys, tonight we're diving into the absolutely mind-blowing story of Europe's first advanced civilization, the Minoans, the Bronze Age masters, who built massive palaces without a single wall for defense, and somehow dominated the Mediterranean for over 1,000 years, while everyone else was still figuring out basic agriculture. We're covering the complete history of the civilization that invented Europe's first writing system, created art so beautiful it still makes modern artists weep, and then mysteriously vanished so completely that we literally forgot they existed until some British guy with a shovel stumbled across their ruins in 1900. So smash that like button if you're ready to learn about the people who were living in palaces with indoor plumbing and flushing toilets, while the rest of Europe was still living in mud huts, and somehow managed to run a peaceful maritime empire without building a single fortress. Hit subscribe for more ancient civilizations that were way more advanced than they had any right to be. And let me know in the comments whether you think they were actually as peaceful as they seem, or if they were just really good at hiding their weapons. Now settle in, because we're exploring how a bunch of Bronze Age islanders became the ancient world's most successful traders, built labyrinthine palaces that inspired Greek mythology, survived multiple earthquakes and volcanic eruptions, and then disappeared so thoroughly that their own writing system is still a complete mystery. All while apparently having the time to create some of the most stunning art in human history and possibly invent the world's first gender-equal society. Because apparently, the Minoans were just overachievers like that. The story of the Minoan Civilization begins around 3000 BCE on the island of Crete, nestled in the Mediterranean Sea like a strategic stepping stone between Europe, Asia, and Africa. The Minoans, named after the legendary King Minos by archaeologist Sir Arthur Evans in the early 20th century, were not actually called Minoans by themselves. We have no idea what they called themselves, which is honestly quite embarrassing for a civilization that lasted over 1,000 years. It's like forgetting your own name at a party, except the party lasted 15 centuries. The earliest inhabitants of Crete arrived during the Neolithic period, around 7000 BCE, bringing with them the revolutionary technologies of agriculture and animal domestication. These early settlers established small farming communities across the island, cultivating wheat, barley, and legumes, while raising cattle, sheep, goats, and pigs. The transition from hunter-gatherer societies to agricultural communities marked the beginning of permanent settlement on Crete, setting the stage for the remarkable civilization that would emerge millennia later. The Neolithic settlers of Crete faced numerous challenges in establishing their agricultural communities. The island's mountainous terrain and variable climate required careful selection of settlement, locations, and adaptation of farming techniques to local conditions. Archaeological evidence from sites such as Knossos and Phaistos shows that these early farmers developed sophisticated strategies for managing water resources, including the construction of wells and simple irrigation systems. They also learned to exploit the island's natural resources, including obsidian from nearby volcanic islands, which they used to create sharp tools and weapons. The social organization of Neolithic Crete appears to have been relatively egalitarian, with little evidence for significant social stratification or centralized authority. Settlements were typically small, consisting of a few dozen houses arranged around common areas used for food preparation and storage. Burial practices were simple, with most individuals interred in collective tombs or simple pit graves. However, even during this early period, there were signs of increasing social complexity, including evidence for craft specialization and long-distance trade connections. The transition from the Neolithic to the Bronze Age, around 3000 BCE, marked a crucial turning point in Cretan prehistory. The introduction of bronze-working technology revolutionized tool and weapon production, while also creating new opportunities for trade and craft specialization. The earliest Bronze Age settlements on Crete show clear continuity with their Neolithic predecessors, but also display new features, that would become characteristic of later Minoan civilization. By 3000 BCE, the early Minoan period had begun, characterized by the development of bronze-working technology and increasingly sophisticated pottery. The Minoans quickly mastered the art of bronze metallurgy, creating tools, weapons, and decorative objects that demonstrated both technical skill and artistic sensibility. Their pottery from this period shows influences from Anatolia and the Cycladic Islands, indicating that even in these early stages, the Minoans were active participants in Mediterranean trade networks. The early Minoan period is traditionally divided into three subperiods. Early Minoan I, 3000 to 2700 BCE, Early Minoan II, 2700 to 2200 BCE, and Early Minoan III, 2200 to 2000 BCE. Each of these periods shows distinct developments in material culture, settlement patterns, and social organization. During early Minoan I, the focus was on establishing stable agricultural communities and developing basic bronze-working skills. The pottery of this period, known as Pyrgos ware, featured simple geometric decorations and showed clear influences from contemporary Anatolian cultures. Early Minoan II witnessed significant developments in pottery production, with the emergence of the distinctive Vasiliki ware. This pottery style featured a mottled red and black surface created through controlled firing techniques, demonstrating increasing technical sophistication among Minoan potters. The period also saw the construction of the first monumental buildings on Crete, including the early structures at Knossos and Phaistos that would later be incorporated into the great palace complexes. The geographical position of Crete proved to be the Minoans' greatest asset. Located at the crossroads of three continents, the island became a natural hub for maritime trade. The Minoans developed into master seafarers, their ships carrying goods across the Mediterranean and establishing trade relationships that would form the backbone of their prosperity. They traded Cretan products like olive oil, wine, and pottery for raw materials such as copper from Cyprus, tin from Anatolia, and precious stones from various Mediterranean sources. The development of Minoan maritime technology was a gradual process that began during the early Minoan period. The earliest Minoan ships were probably simple rowing boats suitable for coastal navigation and short-distance voyages. However, as trade networks expanded and the demand for long-distance transportation increased, Minoan shipbuilders developed more sophisticated vessels capable of carrying substantial cargoes across open water. Archaeological evidence for early Minoan ships is limited, but artistic depictions and the discovery of anchors and other maritime equipment provide insights into their nautical capabilities. During the early Minoan period, several important settlements emerged across Crete. Knossos, which would later become the most famous Minoan palace site, began as a modest settlement on a hill overlooking the northern coast. The location was strategically chosen for its access to both agricultural land and maritime trade routes. Other significant early sites included Phaistos in the south, positioned to control trade routes across the Messara Plain, Mallia on the northern coast, and Zakros in the east, which would later become an important center for trade with the eastern Mediterranean. The settlement at Knossos, during the early Minoan period, consisted of scattered houses and workshops arranged around a central area that would later become the site of the Great Palace. Archaeological excavations have revealed evidence for various craft activities, including pottery production, metalworking, and textile manufacture. The presence of imported materials and finished goods indicates that Knossos was already participating in regional trade networks during this early period. The site of Phaistos, located on a hill overlooking the fertile Messara Plain in southern Crete, was another important early Minoan settlement. The location provided excellent agricultural land and access to the southern coast, facilitating trade with Egypt and the eastern Mediterranean. Early Minoan remains at Phaistos include substantial stone buildings and evidence for sophisticated craft production, suggesting that the site was already emerging as a regional center during this period. Mallia, situated on the northern coast of Crete, developed as an important early Minoan settlement due to its strategic location for maritime trade. The site controlled access to the fertile Lassithi plain and served as a gateway for trade routes extending into the interior of the island. Archaeological evidence from early Minoan Mallia includes substantial architectural remains and a rich assemblage of pottery and other artifacts that demonstrate the site's prosperity and connections to broader Mediterranean trade networks. The Minoans' relationship with the sea was fundamental to their identity and success. Unlike many ancient civilizations that were primarily land-based, the Minoans embraced their maritime environment wholeheartedly. They developed advanced shipbuilding techniques, creating vessels capable of long-distance voyages across the often treacherous Mediterranean waters. Their ships were not just functional, but also beautiful, decorated with elaborate paintings and carvings that reflected their artistic sensibilities. The development of Minoan maritime culture was closely connected to their religious beliefs and practices. The sea was viewed not merely as a means of transportation and trade, but as a sacred realm inhabited by powerful deities and supernatural forces. Minoan art frequently depicts marine creatures such as dolphins, octopi, and fish, often in religious or ceremonial contexts. The famous Admiral's Fresco from Akrotiri shows a fleet of Minoan ships participating in what appears to be a religious or ceremonial voyage, demonstrating the integration of maritime activities with spiritual beliefs. Archaeological evidence from early Minoan sites reveals a society that was already showing signs of social stratification. Burial practices varied significantly, with some individuals interred in elaborate tholos tombs containing rich grave goods, while others received simpler burials. This suggests that Minoan society was developing hierarchical structures, with certain individuals or families accumulating wealth and status through trade, craft specialization, or other means. The tholos tombs of the early Minoan period represent some of the most impressive architectural achievements of early Cretan civilization. These circular stone structures, built using sophisticated corbelling techniques, served as collective burial places for elite families or communities. The most famous examples, located in the Messara plain near Phaistos, contained rich assemblages of pottery, jewelry, weapons, and other grave goods that demonstrate the wealth and status of their occupants. The construction of these monuments required significant resources and coordinated labor, indicating the emergence of powerful social groups capable of organizing large-scale projects. The Minoans' artistic traditions began to flourish during the early Minoan period. Their pottery evolved from simple functional vessels to elaborate works of art featuring complex geometric patterns, stylized natural motifs, and innovative decorative techniques. The famous Kamares ware, with its distinctive white and red designs on dark backgrounds, emerged during this period and became highly prized throughout the Mediterranean world. It's worth noting that Kamares pottery was so popular that it was essentially the ancient world's equivalent of designer handbags, expensive, beautiful, and a clear status symbol. The production of Kamares ware required exceptional skill and technical knowledge. The distinctive polychrome decoration was achieved through a complex firing process that required precise control of temperature and atmosphere within the kiln. The potters had to apply multiple layers of slip and paint, each requiring different firing conditions to achieve the desired colors and effects. The fact that Minoan potters mastered these techniques during the early Minoan period demonstrates their advanced understanding of ceramic technology and their commitment to artistic excellence. Religious practices during the early Minoan period centered around nature worship and fertility cults. Archaeological evidence suggests that the Minoans worshipped a mother goddess figure, often depicted with snakes or other symbols of fertility and regeneration. Sacred caves and mountaintop sanctuaries served as important religious sites, where offerings of pottery, figurines, and other valuable objects were made to ensure divine favor. The famous snake goddess figurines, with their elaborate dress and serpentine companions, provide insight into Minoan religious beliefs and practices. The cave sanctuaries of early Minoan Crete were among the most important religious sites of the period. The Kamares cave, located high on the slopes of Mount Ida, has yielded thousands of pottery vessels and other offerings dating to the early and middle Minoan periods. The cave's remote location and difficult access suggest that pilgrimage to such sites was an important aspect of Minoan religious practice. Other significant cave sanctuaries include the Dictyon cave in the Lassithi Mountains and the Aegean cave on Mount Ida, both of which continued to be important religious sites throughout Minoan history. The mountaintop sanctuaries of early Minoan Crete served as focal points for religious activities and community gatherings. These sites, typically located on prominent peaks with commanding views of the surrounding landscape, were marked by the construction of simple altars and the deposition of votive offerings. The most famous example is the sanctuary on Mount Joktus, overlooking Knossos, which remained an important religious site throughout Minoan history. The choice of such elevated locations for religious activities reflects the Minoan belief in the sacred nature of mountains and their role as intermediaries between the earthly and divine realms. The transition from the early Minoan to the middle Minoan period around 2000 BCE marked the beginning of what many scholars consider the golden age of Minoan civilization. This period, also known as the Old Palace period, witnessed the construction of the first monumental palace complexes that would become the defining feature of Minoan culture. The palaces at Knossos, Phaistos, Mallia, and Zakros were not merely royal residences, but complex administrative, religious, and economic centers that coordinated the activities of their surrounding territories. The construction of the first palaces represented a revolutionary development in Minoan society, marking the transition from relatively simple agricultural communities to complex urban civilizations. The palaces served multiple functions, combining residential, administrative, religious, storage, and craft production facilities within single architectural complexes. This integration of diverse activities under centralized control allowed for unprecedented levels of economic coordination and social organization. The palace at Knossos, the largest and most elaborate of the Minoan palaces, covered an area of approximately 20,000 square meters and contained hundreds of rooms arranged around a central courtyard. The complexity of its layout, with its maze-like corridors, multiple levels, and interconnected chambers, may have inspired the later Greek legend of the labyrinth and the Minotaur. The palace featured advanced architectural innovations, including sophisticated drainage systems, light wells for natural illumination, and elaborate frescoes that decorated the walls with scenes of nature, religious ceremonies, and daily life. The central courtyard of the Knossos Palace served as the focal point of the entire complex, providing a large open space for ceremonies, gatherings, and other public activities. The courtyard was paved with stone slabs and surrounded by multi-story buildings that housed various administrative, residential, and storage functions. The north-south orientation of the courtyard and its precise rectangular shape suggests that it was designed according to specific architectural principles that may have had religious or symbolic significance. The construction of these palaces required unprecedented levels of organization, planning, and resources. The Minoans had to quarry and transport massive stone blocks, coordinate the work of hundreds of craftsmen and laborers, and manage complex supply chains to obtain materials from across the Mediterranean. The fact that they accomplished this without the use of iron tools, Bronze Age technology was still the norm, makes their architectural achievements even more impressive. It's rather like building a skyscraper with nothing but hand tools and sheer determination, though admittedly with better weather and more olive oil. The architectural techniques employed in palace construction demonstrate sophisticated understanding of engineering principles and construction methods. The Minoans used a combination of stone masonry, timber framing, and mudbrick construction to create buildings that were both structurally sound and aesthetically pleasing. The use of wooden beams and columns provided flexibility that helped buildings withstand the frequent earthquakes that affected Crete. The famous tapered columns of Minoan architecture, wider at the top than at the bottom, may have been designed to provide additional stability during seismic events. The Middle Minoan period saw the development of the first Minoan writing system, known today as Linear A. This script, which remains undeciphered despite decades of scholarly effort, was used primarily for administrative purposes, recording transactions, inventories, and other bureaucratic information. The existence of Linear A demonstrates that Minoan society had reached a level of complexity that required written records to function effectively. Thousands of Linear A tablets have been discovered at various Minoan sites, tantalizing scholars with their undeciphered secrets about Minoan language, religion, and daily life. The Linear A script consists of approximately 90 different signs, including both syllabic symbols and ideograms, representing specific objects or concepts. The script was written from left to right and was used to record information on clay tablets, stone vessels, and other objects. The administrative nature of most Linear A texts suggests that the script was primarily used by palace bureaucrats to manage the complex economic and administrative systems of Minoan society. The inability to decipher Linear A remains one of the greatest frustrations in Minoan studies, as it prevents direct access to Minoan thoughts, beliefs, and administrative practices. Trade during the Middle Minoan period reached unprecedented levels of sophistication and geographic scope. Minoan merchants established trading posts and colonies throughout the Aegean, including significant settlements on the islands of Thera, Rhodes, and Cythera. Minoan pottery and other artifacts have been found as far away as Egypt, the Levant, and Anatolia, indicating that their trade networks spanned the entire eastern Mediterranean. The Minoans exported olive oil, wine, pottery, textiles, and metalwork, while importing raw materials, exotic goods, and luxury items from distant lands. The organization of Minoan trade was remarkably sophisticated, involving complex networks of merchants, agents, and intermediaries who coordinated the movement of goods across vast distances. The palaces served as central nodes in these trade networks, providing storage facilities, administrative oversight, and financial backing for commercial ventures. The standardization of weights and measures across Minoan sites suggests that trade was conducted according to established protocols and regulations that facilitated commerce across cultural and linguistic boundaries. The relationship between the Minoans and Egypt during this period was particularly significant. Egyptian records mention a people called the Kaftiu, who are generally identified with the Minoans, bringing tribute and trade goods to the pharaoh's court. Egyptian tomb paintings depict these Keftiu wearing distinctive Minoan clothing and carrying characteristic Minoan vessels, providing valuable visual evidence of Minoan appearance and material culture. The Minoans imported Egyptian gold, ivory, and precious stones while exporting their renowned pottery and other manufactured goods. The tomb paintings in Egyptian nobles' tombs provide some of the most detailed visual evidence for Minoan appearance and material culture. The Keftiu are depicted wearing distinctive clothing, including kilts with elaborate patterns, tight-fitting jackets, and distinctive hairstyles. They carry characteristic Minoan vessels, including the famous Riton, ritual pouring vessels, shaped like bulls' heads and other animals. These depictions suggest that the Minoans maintained regular diplomatic and commercial relations with Egypt, and that their distinctive cultural style was well known in Egyptian court circles. Minoan society during the Middle Minoan period appears to have been relatively peaceful and prosperous. Unlike many contemporary civilizations, Minoan settlements were generally unfortified, suggesting that they felt secure from external threats. This security was likely due to their naval supremacy in the Aegean, which protected them from invasion and allowed them to control maritime trade routes. The absence of fortifications also suggests that internal conflict was minimal, indicating a stable and well-organized society with effective mechanisms for resolving disputes and maintaining social order. The peaceful nature of Minoan society during the Middle Minoan period is reflected in their art and architecture, which emphasizes natural beauty, religious themes, and scenes of daily life rather than warfare and conquest. Unlike the art of many contemporary civilizations, Minoan frescoes and pottery rarely depict battle scenes, weapons, or military activities. Instead, they show dolphins playing in the sea, young people participating in athletic competitions, and elaborate religious ceremonies. This artistic emphasis suggests a culture that valued harmony, beauty, and spiritual fulfillment over military conquest and political domination. The role of women in Minoan society appears to have been unusually prominent for the ancient world. Artistic depictions show women participating in religious ceremonies, athletic competitions, and other public activities. The famous fresco of the Ladies in Blue from Knossos depicts elegantly dressed women in what appears to be a social gathering, while the bull-leaping frescoes show both men and women participating in this dangerous ritual sport. Some scholars have suggested that Minoan society may have been matriarchal, or at least more gender egalitarian than other contemporary civilizations, though this interpretation remains debated. The prominence of women in Minoan religious art is particularly striking. Female figures appear frequently as priestesses, goddesses, and ritual participants in frescoes, sculptures, and other artistic works. The famous snake goddess figurines from Knossos depict elaborately dressed women holding serpents, symbols of fertility and regeneration in Minoan religion. These figurines may represent actual priestesses or goddesses, and their prominent display in palace contexts suggests that women held important religious roles in Minoan society. The Ladies in Blue fresco from Knossos provides fascinating insights into elite Minoan women's lives and social activities. The fresco depicts three women engaged in animated conversation, their elaborate hairstyles, jewelry, and clothing indicating high social status. The women's confident postures and animated gestures suggest that they were participating in important social or political discussions, challenging traditional assumptions about women's roles in ancient societies. The artistic quality of the fresco, in its prominent placement in a palace, indicate that such gatherings were considered significant enough to commemorate in permanent art. The Minoan economy during the Middle Minoan period was remarkably diversified and sophisticated. Agriculture remained the foundation, with the Minoans cultivating the Mediterranean triad of wheat, olives, and grapes, along with various other crops. They developed advanced agricultural techniques, including terracing, irrigation, and crop rotation to maximize productivity on their mountainous island. Craft specialization reached new heights, with skilled artisans producing pottery, metalwork, textiles, jewelry, and other goods for both local consumption and export. The agricultural systems of Middle Minoan Crete were highly sophisticated and well adapted to the island's Mediterranean climate and mountainous terrain. The Minoans developed extensive terracing systems to create arable land on steep hillsides, preventing soil erosion while maximizing agricultural productivity. These terraces, many of which are still visible today, required enormous investments of labor and demonstrate the Minoans' commitment to intensive agricultural development. The cultivation of olives was particularly important to the Minoan economy, providing not only food, but also oil for lighting, cooking, and religious ceremonies. Olive oil was one of the Minoans' most important export commodities, highly prized throughout the Mediterranean world for its quality and purity. The production of olive oil required sophisticated processing equipment, including stone presses and storage facilities, which have been found at numerous Minoan sites. The standardization of oil storage vessels suggests that olive oil production was carefully regulated and controlled by palace authorities. Viticulture was another crucial component of the Minoan agricultural system. The Minoans cultivated various grape varieties and developed sophisticated wine-making techniques that produced high-quality wines for both local consumption and export. Wine played important roles in Minoan religious ceremonies and social gatherings, and elaborate drinking vessels found in palace contexts suggest that wine consumption was associated with elite status and ritual activities. The famous Minoan pottery of this period, particularly the polychrome Kamares ware, represents one of the high points of ancient ceramic art. These vessels featured elaborate designs in white, red, and yellow on dark backgrounds, often incorporating naturalistic motifs such as fish, octopi, and plant forms. The technical skill required to produce these ceramics, with their thin walls, complex shapes, and intricate decorations, demonstrates the high level of craftsmanship achieved by Minoan potters. The popularity of Kamares ware throughout the Mediterranean world made it an important export commodity and a symbol of Minoan cultural influence. The production of Kamares ware required not only exceptional artistic skill, but also sophisticated understanding of ceramic technology. The distinctive polychrome decoration was achieved through multiple firings at different temperatures, with each color requiring specific atmospheric conditions within the kiln. The potters had to master complex chemical processes involving the interaction of different clays, slips, and pigments to achieve the desired visual effects. The consistency of quality across different production centers suggests that Minoan potters shared technical knowledge and maintained high standards through formal or informal training systems. The decorative motifs used on Kamares ware reflect the Minoans' close relationship with their natural environment. Marine creatures such as fish, octopi, and dolphins appear frequently, often rendered with remarkable naturalistic detail that suggests careful observation of living specimens. Plant motifs include stylized flowers, leaves, and abstract patterns derived from natural forms. The integration of these naturalistic elements with geometric patterns creates a distinctive artistic style that is immediately recognizable as Minoan. Religious practices during the Middle Minoan period became increasingly elaborate and institutionalized. The palaces served as major religious centers, with shrines, ritual chambers, and storage areas for religious paraphernalia. The famous throne room at Knossos, with its gypsum throne and griffin frescoes, may have been used for religious ceremonies rather than secular administration. Sacred symbols such as the double axe, sacred horns, and the sacred knot appear frequently in Minoan art and architecture, indicating their importance in religious practice. The double axe, or labyrinths, was one of the most important sacred symbols in Minoan religion. These ceremonial axes, often made of precious metals and decorated with elaborate designs, have been found in religious contexts throughout Crete. The symbol appears frequently in Minoan art, sometimes held by female figures who may represent priestesses or goddesses. The association of the double axe with female religious figures suggests that it may have been particularly connected to goddess worship and female religious authority. The sacred horns, another important Minoan religious symbol, appear in various forms throughout Minoan art and architecture. These stylized bull's horns were often carved in stone and placed on altars, rooftops, and other sacred locations. The horns may have represented the sacred bull, an important figure in Minoan religion, or they may have symbolized the crescent moon or other celestial phenomena. The widespread use of this symbol suggests that it held deep religious significance for the Minoans. The Minoans' relationship with bulls appears to have been central to their religious beliefs and practices. The famous bull-leaping frescoes from Knossos depict young men and women performing acrobatic feats with charging bulls, possibly as part of religious ceremonies or athletic competitions. Whether this dangerous activity was purely ceremonial, a form of entertainment, or had deeper religious significance remains a subject of scholarly debate. What is clear is that bulls held special significance in Minoan culture, appearing frequently in art, religious contexts, and later Greek mythology about Crete. The bull-leaping scenes depicted in Minoan art are among the most dynamic and exciting images from the ancient world. The frescoes show athletes grasping the horns of charging bulls and somersaulting over their backs in death-defying displays of skill and courage. Both male and female participants are shown, suggesting that this activity was not restricted by gender. The athletic nature of these performances, combined with their apparent religious significance, suggests that they may have been similar to modern Olympic competitions, combining physical prowess with spiritual meaning. The religious significance of bull leaping is suggested by its frequent depiction in palace contexts and its association with other religious symbols. Some scholars have proposed that the bull represented the earth or natural forces, while the leapers represented human attempts to master or harmonize with these forces. Others have suggested that the bull leaping ceremonies were connected to seasonal festivals or agricultural rituals designed to ensure fertility and prosperity. The end of the Middle Minoan period, around 1700 BCE, was marked by a series of destructive earthquakes that damaged many of the palace complexes. However, rather than marking the end of Minoan civilization, these disasters led to a period of rebuilding and renewal. The palaces were reconstructed on an even grander scale, ushering in the late Minoan period and what many consider the absolute peak of Minoan achievement. It's rather remarkable how the Minoans treated natural disasters as renovation opportunities rather than apocalyptic events, an attitude that modern insurance companies would probably find both admirable and financially terrifying. The earthquake damage at the end of the Middle Minoan period was extensive, affecting all the major palace sites and many smaller settlements. Archaeological evidence shows clear destruction layers at Knossos, Phaistos, Mallia, and other sites, with collapsed walls, fallen roofing materials, and scattered artifacts indicating sudden and violent destruction. However, the rapid rebuilding that followed suggests that Minoan society possessed remarkable resilience and organizational capacity. The reconstruction of the palaces after the Middle Minoan earthquakes was not simply a matter of repairing damage, but rather an opportunity for architectural innovation and expansion. The new palaces were larger, more elaborate, and more sophisticated than their predecessors, incorporating lessons learned from the earthquake damage and new architectural techniques developed during the rebuilding process. The speed and scale of reconstruction suggest that the Minoans had developed effective systems for mobilizing resources and coordinating large-scale construction projects. The late Minoan period, beginning around 1700 BCE, represents the zenith of Minoan civilization. The rebuilt palaces were larger, more elaborate, and more sophisticated than their predecessors, featuring advanced architectural techniques, stunning artistic decorations, and complex administrative systems. The palace at Knossos reached its maximum extent during this period, becoming a sprawling complex that dominated the surrounding landscape and served as the political, economic, and religious center of central Crete. The late Minoan palace at Knossos covered an area of approximately 22,000 square meters and contained over 1,000 rooms arranged in a complex multi-story layout. The palace included residential quarters for the royal family and court officials, administrative offices, storage magazines, workshops, and religious shrines. The famous grand staircase provided access to the upper floors, while the Queen's Magaron featured sophisticated bathroom facilities with running water and elaborate decorative frescoes. The architectural innovations of the late Minoan period included advanced techniques for earthquake resistance, improved drainage systems, and sophisticated lighting solutions. The Minoans developed a distinctive architectural style that combined functional efficiency with aesthetic beauty, using local materials such as limestone and gypsum to create buildings that were both structurally sound and visually impressive. The use of light wells and clerestory windows provided natural illumination to interior spaces, while the integration of gardens and courtyards created pleasant living environments. The late Minoan period saw the development of increasingly sophisticated artistic styles and techniques. The The famous frescoes from this period, including the Prince of the Lily, the Dolphin fresco, and the Procession fresco, demonstrate a mastery of naturalistic representation and artistic composition that rivals the best work of any ancient civilization. These frescoes decorated the walls of palace rooms, corridors, and ceremonial spaces, creating immersive environments that combined religious symbolism, natural beauty, and artistic excellence. The Prince of the Lily fresco from Knossos depicts a young man wearing an elaborate feathered crown and ornate jewelry, leading a procession or participating in a religious ceremony. The figure's confident posture and rich attire suggest high social status, possibly representing a priest-king or other important religious official. The artistic quality of the fresco, with its careful attention to detail and sophisticated use of color, demonstrates the high level of skill achieved by Minoan artists during the late Minoan period. The Dolphin fresco from the Queen's Megaron at Knossos is one of the most beloved examples of Minoan art. The fresco depicts dolphins swimming in a marine environment, surrounded by fish and other sea creatures. The naturalistic rendering of the dolphins, with their graceful movements and playful expressions, demonstrates the Minoan artists' careful observation of marine life and their ability to capture the essence of natural forms in their art. The Procession fresco from Knossos originally decorated a long corridor in the palace and depicted a ceremonial procession of gift-bearers approaching a central figure, possibly a deity or ruler. The fresco demonstrates the Minoans' mastery of large-scale composition and their ability to create narrative scenes that tell complex stories. The careful attention to costume details and individual facial features suggests that the figures may have represented actual historical persons participating in important ceremonies. Minoan pottery during the late Minoan period evolved beyond the polychrome Kamares style to embrace new decorative approaches. The marine-style pottery of this period featured naturalistic depictions of sea creatures such as octopi, dolphins, and nautili, reflecting the Minoans' continued close relationship with the sea. These vessels demonstrate not only technical skill, but also careful observation of marine life, suggesting that Minoan artists spent considerable time studying their natural environment. The floral-style pottery featured elaborate plant motifs, often arranged in complex, symmetrical patterns that show sophisticated understanding of decorative design principles. The marine-style pottery represents one of the most distinctive and accomplished ceramic traditions of the ancient world. The famous octopus stirrup jar from Palais Castro depicts a large octopus with its tentacles spread across the entire surface of the vessel, creating a dynamic and naturalistic composition that seems to bring the creature to life. The artist's understanding of octopus anatomy and behavior is remarkable, suggesting direct observation of living specimens. The floral-style pottery of the late Minoan period featured elaborate plant motifs that were often highly stylized, but still recognizable as specific species. Popular motifs included lily, papyrus, ivy, and various flowering plants, often arranged in complex symmetrical patterns that demonstrate sophisticated understanding of decorative design principles. The integration of naturalistic plant forms with geometric patterns created a distinctive artistic style that influenced pottery production throughout the Mediterranean world. The administrative systems of the late Minoan palaces reached new levels of complexity and efficiency. The linear A script was used extensively for record keeping, with thousands of tablets documenting everything from livestock inventories to religious offerings. The palaces served as redistribution centers, collecting agricultural surplus from the surrounding countryside and redistributing it according to complex systems that we can only partially understand. This centralized economic system allowed the Minoans to support large populations, maintain extensive trade networks, and fund ambitious construction projects. The linear A administrative tablets from late Minoan palaces provide fascinating glimpses into the complexity of Minoan bureaucracy, even though we cannot read the actual text. The tablets record various types of transactions, including deliveries of agricultural products, distributions of goods to workers and officials, and inventories of stored materials. The systematic organization of these records suggests that Minoan administrators had developed sophisticated accounting procedures and record-keeping systems. The redistribution system operated by the late Minoan palaces was remarkably complex and efficient. Agricultural products from the surrounding countryside were collected at the palaces, processed and stored in large magazines, and then redistributed according to established protocols. This system allowed for efficient resource allocation, risk management through storage of surplus production, and support for specialized craftsmen and officials who did not directly participate in agricultural production. Trade during the late Minoan period reached its greatest extent and sophistication. Minoan merchants and diplomats traveled throughout the Mediterranean world, establishing trading relationships with Egypt, the Levant, Anatolia, and the Greek mainland. The famous Minoan thalassocracy, their supposed naval empire, may have been more of a commercial network than a political empire, but it was nonetheless extensive and influential. Minoan goods, ideas, and artistic styles spread throughout the Aegean world, influencing the development of other civilizations, including the Mycenaeans on the Greek mainland. The extent of Minoan trade networks during the late Minoan period is demonstrated by the widespread distribution of Minoan artifacts throughout the Mediterranean world. Minoan pottery has been found in Egypt, Cyprus, the Levant, Anatolia, and throughout the Aegean islands. The consistency of style and quality across these widely distributed artifacts suggests that Minoan merchants maintained regular trade routes and established permanent trading posts in foreign lands. The organization of Minoan trade was sophisticated and well coordinated, involving networks of merchants, agents, and intermediaries who facilitated the movement of goods across vast distances. The palaces provided financial backing, storage facilities, and administrative oversight for commercial ventures, while specialized merchants handled the actual transportation and sale of goods. The development of standardized weights and measures facilitated trade across cultural and linguistic boundaries. The relationship between the Minoans and the emerging Mycenaean civilization on the Greek mainland during this period was complex and multifaceted. Initially, the Mycenaeans appear to have been heavily influenced by Minoan culture, adopting Minoan artistic styles, religious practices, and even administrative techniques. Mycenaean pottery from this period often imitates Minoan styles, and Mycenaean palaces show clear Minoan architectural influences. However, the relationship was not entirely one-sided, as Mycenaean military technology and social organization also influenced Minoan society. The influence of Minoan culture on the developing Mycenaean civilization was profound and long-lasting. Mycenaean palaces at sites such as Pylos, Tiryns, and Mycenae incorporated architectural features derived from Minoan models, including central courtyards, complex room arrangements, and sophisticated drainage systems. Mycenaean religious practices also showed clear Minoan influences, particularly in the worship of female deities and the use of sacred symbols such as the double axe and sacred horns. The artistic influence of Minoan culture on the Mycenaeans is particularly evident in pottery production and fresco painting. Early Mycenaean pottery often directly copied Minoan decorative motifs and vessel forms, while Mycenaean frescoes from sites such as Pylos and Tiryns show clear stylistic connections to Minoan wall paintings. The famous griffin fresco from the throne room at Pylos, for example, is clearly derived from Minoan prototypes, though it incorporates distinctively Mycenaean elements as well. However, the relationship between Minoans and Mycenaeans was not simply one of cultural borrowing. The Mycenaeans also contributed their own innovations, particularly in military technology and organization. Mycenaean warriors were equipped with bronze weapons and armor that were more advanced than contemporary Minoan military equipment, and their society was organized along more militaristic lines than the apparently peaceful Minoan civilization. The famous eruption of the volcano on the island of Thera, modern Santorini, around 1628 BCE, had significant impacts on Minoan civilization, though the exact nature and extent of these impacts remain debated among scholars. The eruption was one of the largest volcanic events in recorded history, creating massive tsunamis and depositing volcanic ash across the eastern Mediterranean. While the eruption certainly affected Minoan settlements, particularly those on the northern coast of Crete, it did not immediately end Minoan civilization, as was once believed. Archaeological evidence shows that Minoan society continued to function and even prosper for several decades after the eruption. The Thera eruption was a catastrophic event of almost unimaginable proportions. The volcanic explosion ejected an estimated 60 cubic kilometers of magma and created a caldera, approximately 12 kilometers in diameter. The eruption generated massive tsunamis that would have reached heights of 35 to 150 meters on nearby coastlines, while volcanic ash was deposited across a vast area of the eastern Mediterranean. The ash layer from the Thera eruption has been identified at sites throughout the region, providing a precise chronological marker for late Bronze Age archaeology. The immediate effects of the Thera eruption on Crete would have been devastating for coastal settlements. The tsunamis generated by the volcanic explosion would have destroyed harbors, ships, and coastal buildings, while the volcanic ash would have contaminated water supplies and damaged crops. However, the interior of Crete was largely protected from the worst effects of the eruption, and archaeological evidence suggests that most Minoan settlements recovered relatively quickly from the initial damage. The site of Akrotiri on Thera provides a unique window into Minoan life at the time of the eruption. The settlement was buried under volcanic ash, creating exceptional preservation conditions that have allowed archaeologists to recover organic materials, wooden furniture, and other perishable items that normally would have decayed long ago. The frescoes from Akrotiri are among the best preserved examples of Minoan art, providing detailed information about Minoan clothing, hairstyles, religious practices, and daily life. The spring fresco from Akrotiri depicts a rocky landscape covered with blooming lily, creating a naturalistic scene that demonstrates the Minoan artists' love of nature and their skill in representing natural forms. The fresco originally decorated a room in a private house, suggesting that high-quality artistic decoration was not limited to palace contexts, but was also enjoyed by wealthy private individuals. The Boxing Boys fresco from Akrotiri shows two young men engaged in a boxing match, wearing only loincloths and boxing gloves. The dynamic poses and careful attention to anatomical detail demonstrate the Minoan artists' ability to capture movement and energy in their work. The fresco provides evidence for organized athletic competitions in Minoan society and suggests that physical fitness and athletic prowess were highly valued. The Thera eruption did, however, mark the beginning of a period of gradual decline for Minoan civilization. The exact causes of this decline are complex and multifaceted, involving environmental, economic, political, and social factors. The volcanic ash from Thera may have affected agricultural productivity, while the tsunamis could have damaged coastal settlements and harbors. More significantly, the eruption may have disrupted trade networks and weakened Minoan naval supremacy, creating opportunities for competitors such as the Mycenaeans to challenge Minoan dominance in the Aegean. The environmental impacts of the Thera eruption extended far beyond the immediate destruction caused by tsunamis and ashfall. The massive amount of volcanic material ejected into the atmosphere would have affected climate patterns across the eastern Mediterranean, potentially causing cooler temperatures and altered precipitation patterns for several years following the eruption. These climate changes could have had significant impacts on agricultural productivity and economic stability throughout the region. The disruption of trade networks following the Thera eruption may have been one of the most significant long-term consequences for Minoan civilization. The destruction of harbors and ships would have temporarily interrupted maritime commerce, while the general disruption caused by the eruption may have made trading partners reluctant to maintain commercial relationships with Cretan merchants. The loss of trade revenue would have weakened the economic foundations of Minoan society and reduced the resources available for maintaining the complex palace-centered administrative systems. During the later part of the late Minoan period, there is increasing evidence of Mycenaean influence and possibly even control over parts of Crete. The Linear B script, which was used by the Mycenaeans and has been deciphered as an early form of Greek, appears at Knossos around 1450 BCE, suggesting that Greek-speaking peoples had gained control of the palace. This transition from Linear A to Linear B represents a fundamental change in the linguistic and possibly ethnic composition of Crete's ruling elite. The appearance of Linear B tablets at Knossos provides direct evidence for Mycenaean control of the palace during the final phase of its occupation. The tablets record administrative information in an early form of Greek, documenting the management of livestock, land tenure, craft production, and religious activities. The content of these tablets provides valuable insights into the organization of late Minoan society under Mycenaean rule, showing both continuities with earlier Minoan practices and innovations introduced by the new rulers. The Linear B tablets from Knossos reveal a complex administrative system that combined Mycenaean bureaucratic practices with traditional Minoan economic activities. The tablets document the management of large flocks of sheep and herds of cattle, the allocation of land to various officials and religious functionaries, and the production of textiles, pottery, and other craft goods. The system appears to have been highly centralized, with palace officials exercising detailed control over economic activities throughout the surrounding territory. The religious information contained in the Linear B tablets provides fascinating insights into the blending of Minoan and Mycenaean religious traditions during this period. The tablets mention various deities, including some that are clearly recognizable as later Greek gods and goddesses, alongside others that may represent traditional Minoan divinities. This religious syncretism suggests that the Mycenaean takeover of Crete involved not just political conquest, but also cultural accommodation and blending. The final destruction of the Minoan palaces occurred around 1450 BCE, marking the end of the palace period and the beginning of Minoan civilization's final phase. The causes of this destruction remain debated, with theories ranging from natural disasters to Mycenaean conquest to internal social upheaval. What is clear is that the destruction was widespread and thorough, affecting all the major palace sites simultaneously. The fact that the palaces were not rebuilt suggests that the social and economic systems that supported them had collapsed irreversibly. The archaeological evidence for the final destruction of the Minoan palaces is dramatic and unambiguous. At Knossos, Phaistos, Mallia, and Zakros, archaeologists have found clear destruction layers containing burned debris, collapsed walls, and scattered artifacts. The simultaneity of these destruction events across multiple sites suggests a coordinated attack or a series of natural disasters occurring within a short time period. The nature of the destruction evidence has led to various theories about its causes. Some scholars argue that the destruction was caused by Mycenaean military conquest, pointing to the appearance of Mycenaean-style weapons and the subsequent establishment of Mycenaean control at Knossos. Others suggest that internal social upheaval or natural disasters, such as earthquakes, were responsible for the palace destructions. The truth may involve a combination of these factors, with natural disasters weakening Minoan society and creating opportunities for external conquest or internal revolution. The failure to rebuild the palaces after their destruction in 1450 BCE suggests that the social and economic systems that had supported them for over 500 years had collapsed completely. The palace-centered redistribution system, the complex administrative bureaucracy, and the extensive trade networks that had characterized Minoan civilization all disappeared, not to be re-established on the same scale. This collapse represents one of the most dramatic civilizational failures in ancient history. Following the destruction of the palaces, Minoan civilization entered its final phase, known as the Post-palatial period. During this time, Crete was increasingly dominated by Mycenaean Greeks, though Minoan cultural traditions persisted in modified forms. Smaller settlements continued to exist across the island, maintaining some aspects of traditional Minoan life while adapting to new political and cultural realities. The famous warrior graves from this period show a mixture of Minoan and Mycenaean burial practices, reflecting the cultural blending that characterized this transitional era. The post-palatial period of Minoan civilization, lasting from approximately 1450 to 1100 BCE, was characterized by political fragmentation, cultural change, and gradual decline. The centralized palace system that had coordinated Minoan society for over 5 centuries was replaced by a more decentralized system of smaller settlements and regional centers. Some of these may have been controlled by Mycenaean Greeks, while others maintained more traditional Minoan leadership structures. The material culture of the post-palatial period shows clear evidence of cultural blending between Minoan and Mycenaean traditions. Pottery styles incorporated both Minoan decorative motifs and Mycenaean vessel forms, creating hybrid styles that reflected the mixed cultural environment of the period. Similarly, burial practices combined traditional Minoan customs with Mycenaean innovations, producing distinctive regional variations that reflected local cultural preferences. The warrior graves of the post-palatial period provide particularly interesting evidence for cultural change during this transitional era. These burials contain a mixture of traditional Minoan grave goods, such as pottery and jewelry, alongside Mycenaean-style weapons and armor. The presence of weapons in these graves represents a significant departure from earlier Minoan burial practices, which rarely included military equipment, suggesting that warfare had become more prominent in post-palatial Cretan society. The settlement patterns of the post-palatial period also show significant changes from earlier Minoan practices. Many sites were fortified for the first time, suggesting increased concern about security in warfare. The famous site of Carfi, located on a remote mountaintop in eastern Crete, represents a typical post-palatial settlement with its defensive location and simple architecture. These changes suggest that the peaceful conditions that had characterized earlier Minoan civilization had given way to a more unstable and dangerous environment. The economic systems of the post-palatial period were much simpler than those of the palace period. The complex redistribution networks that had characterized Minoan civilization were replaced by more localized exchange systems. Craft production continued, but at a reduced scale and level of sophistication. The fine pottery and elaborate metalwork that had been hallmarks of Minoan civilization became increasingly rare, replaced by simpler, more utilitarian products. The religious practices of the post-palatial period show both continuity and change compared to earlier Minoan traditions. Traditional sacred sites, such as caves and mountaintop sanctuaries, continued to be used, but the elaborate palace-based religious ceremonies of the earlier period disappeared. New religious practices, possibly introduced by Mycenaean settlers, were integrated with traditional Minoan beliefs, creating syncretic religious systems that combined elements from both cultures. The final collapse of Bronze Age civilization in the Aegean around 1200 BCE, part of the broader Late Bronze Age collapse that affected much of the eastern Mediterranean, marked the end of organized Minoan culture. The causes of this collapse remain debated, but probably included a combination of natural disasters, economic disruption, population movements, and political instability. The collapse was so thorough that knowledge of Minoan civilization was almost completely lost, surviving only in fragmentary form in later Greek mythology. The Late Bronze Age collapse was a catastrophic event that affected civilizations throughout the eastern Mediterranean. The Mycenaean palaces on the Greek mainland were destroyed, The Hittite Empire in Anatolia collapsed, and many cities in the Levant were abandoned. The causes of this widespread collapse remain debated, but may have included climate change, population movements, internal social upheaval, and the disruption of trade networks. The effects of the Late Bronze Age collapse on Crete were severe and long-lasting. The remaining Minoan settlements were abandoned or drastically reduced in size, and the island entered a dark age that lasted for several centuries. The sophisticated artistic traditions, complex administrative systems, and extensive trade networks that had characterized Minoan civilization disappeared, not to be equaled again in the Aegean for many centuries. The Dark Age that followed the Bronze Age collapse lasted for several centuries and was characterized by population decline, economic simplification, and cultural regression. During this period, the magnificent palaces of the Minoans were abandoned and gradually buried under accumulated debris. The sophisticated artistic traditions, complex administrative systems, and extensive trade networks that had characterized Minoan civilization disappeared, not to be equaled again in the Aegean for many centuries. The population of Crete during the Dark Age appears to have declined dramatically from the levels reached during the Palace period. Many settlements were abandoned entirely, while others were reduced to small villages. The complex social hierarchies that had characterized Minoan civilization were simplified, and the specialized craft production that had created the beautiful artifacts for which the Minoans are famous largely disappeared. The artistic traditions of the Dark Age were much simpler than those of the Minoan period. The elaborate frescoes, fine pottery, and sophisticated metalwork that had characterized Minoan civilization were replaced by simple utilitarian products. The naturalistic artistic style that had been a hallmark of Minoan art was largely abandoned in favor of geometric patterns and abstract designs. The preservation of Minoan sites was largely accidental, resulting from natural processes of burial and abandonment rather than deliberate conservation efforts. The dry Mediterranean climate helped preserve organic materials that would have decayed in more humid environments, while the accumulation of soil and debris protected architectural remains from destruction. The volcanic ash from the Thera eruption provided exceptional preservation conditions at sites like Akrotiri, creating a unique archaeological time capsule. The gradual burial of Minoan sites under accumulated debris actually helped preserve them for modern archaeological investigation. The abandonment of the palaces meant that later occupants did not disturb the Bronze Age remains, while the Mediterranean climate prevented the rapid decay that would have occurred in more humid environments. The result is that Minoan sites often preserve remarkable details of ancient life, including organic materials, architectural features, and artistic decorations that provide unique insights into Bronze Age civilization. The rediscovery of Minoan civilization began in the late 19th century with the work of Heinrich Schliemann and other early archaeologists, but it was Arthur Evans' excavations at Knossos that truly revealed the extent and sophistication of Minoan culture. Evans' work was groundbreaking, but also controversial, particularly his extensive reconstructions of the palace buildings. Modern archaeologists have criticized Evans for imposing his own aesthetic preferences on the ancient remains, but his work did succeed in bringing Minoan civilization to public attention. Heinrich Schliemann, famous for his excavations at Troy and Mycenaean, was among the first archaeologists to recognize the potential importance of Cretan sites. His preliminary investigations at Knossos in the 1880s revealed the existence of substantial ancient remains, but it was Arthur Evans who undertook the systematic excavation that revealed the true extent of Minoan civilization. Arthur Evans began his excavations at Knossos in 1900 and continued working at the site for over 30 years. His work revealed not only the remains of the Great Palace, but also provided the first evidence for the existence of a sophisticated Bronze Age civilization in Europe. Evans' discovery of the Linear A and Linear B scripts demonstrated that the Minoans had developed writing systems while his uncovering of elaborate frescoes and sophisticated architecture revealed the high level of cultural achievement reached by Minoan civilization. Evan's reconstruction work at Knossos was extensive and controversial. He used modern materials such as concrete and steel to rebuild walls, columns, and entire rooms, creating a version of the ancient palace that reflected his own interpretation of Minoan architecture. While these reconstructions have been criticized for their historical accuracy, they did succeed in giving visitors a sense of the scale and grandeur of the original palace. Modern visitors to Knossos can walk through reconstructed rooms and corridors that provide a vivid impression of what the palace might have looked like in its heyday. The naming of Minoan civilization after the legendary King Minos was Evan's idea, and it has stuck despite the fact that we have no evidence that such a king ever existed. The choice of name was inspired by Greek mythology, which described Minos as the ruler of a powerful maritime empire based on Crete. While the historical accuracy of these myths is questionable, the name Minoan has become firmly established in archaeological literature and popular culture. The decipherment of Linear B script in 1952 by Michael Ventris provided crucial insights into the final period of Minoan civilization and its relationship with the Mycenaeans. Ventris, a British architect and amateur linguist who approached the problem with the systematic methodology of his professional training, demonstrated that Linear B was used to write an early form of Greek. This discovery confirmed that Greek-speaking peoples had indeed gained control of Knossos and possibly other parts of Crete during the final centuries of Minoan civilization. Michael Ventris's approach to deciphering Linear B was methodical and scientific, drawing on his background in architecture and his understanding of structural analysis. He began by analyzing the frequency and distribution of different signs in the Linear B texts, identifying patterns that suggested the script was syllabic rather than alphabetic. His breakthrough came when he realized that certain frequently occurring sign groups might represent place names known from classical Greek sources. The decipherment of Linear B revolutionized understanding of late Bronze Age Greece and the relationship between Minoan and Mycenaean civilizations. The tablets revealed that the final phase of occupation at Knossos was indeed controlled by Greek-speaking administrators who used a writing system derived from the earlier Minoan Linear A script. This discovery provided direct textual evidence for the Mycenaean takeover of Crete and offered detailed insights into the administrative and economic systems of the period. The Linear B tablets from Knossos provide detailed information about the administration of the palace during its final period. These records document everything from livestock inventories to religious offerings, providing insights into the economic and social organization of late Minoan society. The tablets reveal a highly bureaucratic system with specialized officials responsible for different aspects of palace administration, from shepherds and craftsmen to religious functionaries and military personnel. Reading these ancient administrative records is rather like going through someone's extremely detailed filing system from 3,500 years ago. Fascinating for historians, but probably quite tedious for the ancient bureaucrats who created them. The administrative system revealed by the Linear B tablets was remarkably sophisticated and detailed. Palace officials maintained careful records of land tenure, with tablets documenting the allocation of plots to various individuals and the obligations associated with land holding. The system included both private landholders and palace dependents, suggesting a complex mix of private property and state control that may have evolved from earlier Minoan practices. The livestock records in the Linear B tablets provide fascinating insights into the scale and organization of animal husbandry in late Minoan Crete. The tablets document enormous flocks of sheep, some individual flocks numbered in the thousands, as well as substantial herds of cattle, pigs, and goats. The detailed recording of these animals, including their locations, owners, and purposes, suggests that livestock management was a major component of the palace economy. The craft production records in the Linear B tablets reveal the continued importance of specialized manufacturing in late Minoan society. The tablets document the production of textiles, pottery, metalwork, and other goods, often specifying the materials used, the quantities produced, and the intended recipients. The system appears to have maintained the high standards of craftsmanship that had characterized earlier Minoan production, though under Mycenaean administrative control. The failure to decipher linear A script remains one of the great frustrations of Minoan studies. Despite decades of effort by skilled linguists and cryptographers, the earlier Minoan script continues to resist all attempts at decipherment. The problem is compounded by the relatively small number of linear A texts that have survived and the lack of bilingual inscriptions that might provide a key to understanding the script. Without the ability to read linear A, our understanding of Minoan religion, politics, and daily life remains frustratingly incomplete. The challenges facing linear A decipherment are formidable. Unlike linear B, which was deciphered with the help of known place names and the recognition that it recorded an early form of Greek, linear A appears to record a completely unknown language. The script contains approximately 90 different signs, suggesting a syllabic writing system, but without knowledge of the underlying language, it is extremely difficult to assign sound values to the individual signs. Various attempts have been made to decipher linear A by assuming connections to known languages. Some scholars have proposed that linear A records an early form of Greek, while others have suggested connections to Anatolian languages, Semitic languages, or even completely unknown language families. However, none of these approaches has produced convincing results, and the linear A script remains one of the great unsolved puzzles of ancient writing systems. The content of linear A texts appears to be primarily administrative, similar to the linear B tablets, but presumably recording the activities of Minoan rather than Mycenaean administrators. Many tablets contain lists of numbers and commodity signs, suggesting inventories or transaction records. Others appear to record religious offerings or ceremonial activities based on their context of discovery and the presence of religious symbols. Archaeological work at Minoan sites has continued throughout the 20th and 21st centuries, gradually building a more complete picture of Minoan civilization. Excavations at sites such as Phaistos, Mallia, Zakros, and Akrotiri on Thera have revealed the diversity and complexity of Minoan culture. Each site has contributed unique insights into different aspects of Minoan life, from the sophisticated urban planning at Akrotiri to the elaborate religious installations at Zakros. The palace at Phaistos, located on a hill overlooking the fertile Messara plain in southern Crete, has provided important insights into Minoan architecture and administration. The site features two major building phases, with the later palace constructed on top of the earlier one, following earthquake damage. The famous Phaistos disc, a unique clay disc inscribed with undeciphered symbols arranged in a spiral pattern, was discovered at this site and remains one of the most enigmatic artifacts from the ancient world. The Phaistos disc is a circular clay tablet, approximately 15 centimeters in diameter, inscribed with 242 symbols arranged in a spiral pattern from the outside edge toward the center. The symbols appear to have been impressed into the clay using individual stamps, making this one of the earliest examples of printing technology. The meaning of the symbols and the language they represent remain completely unknown, adding another layer of mystery to our understanding of Minoan civilization. The palace at Mallia, located on the northern coast of Crete, has provided valuable insights into Minoan urban planning and daily life. The site includes not only the palace complex, but also an extensive town with houses, workshops, and storage facilities. The famous Chrysolakos cemetery near Mallia has yielded rich burial assemblages that provide insights into Minoan social organization and religious beliefs. The Chrysolakos cemetery at Mallia contains some of the richest burial assemblages from Minoan Crete. The cemetery was used over a long period, from the early Minoan through the late Minoan periods, and contains both individual and collective burials. The grave goods include elaborate jewelry, weapons, pottery, and other luxury items that demonstrate the wealth and status of the individuals buried there. The palace at Zakros, located in eastern Crete near the coast, was the last of the major Minoan palaces to be discovered and excavated. The site has provided exceptional preservation conditions, with many organic materials surviving that have decayed at other sites. The palace appears to have been destroyed suddenly, with many valuable objects left in place, providing a unique snapshot of Minoan palace life at the time of the final destruction. The preservation conditions at Zakros have allowed archaeologists to recover a remarkable range of organic materials, including wooden furniture, leather objects, and even food remains. The famous Peak Sanctuary Rhyton from Zakros, carved from rock crystal and decorated with gold details, represents one of the finest examples of Minoan craftsmanship ever discovered. The site of Akrotiri on the island of Thera deserves special mention for its exceptional preservation. Buried under volcanic ash from the Great Eruption around 1628 BC, Akrotiri provides a unique snapshot of Minoan life frozen in time. The site has yielded remarkably well-preserved frescoes, pottery, furniture, and even organic materials that normally would have decayed long ago. The frescoes from Akrotiri, including the famous spring fresco in Boxing Boys, demonstrate the high level of artistic achievement reached by Minoan painters and provide insights into Minoan religious beliefs and social practices. The preservation at Akrotiri is so exceptional that archaeologists have been able to recover details of daily life that are rarely preserved at other ancient sites. Wooden furniture, including beds, tables, and storage chests, has been preserved in remarkable detail. Food remains, including barley, lentils, and other crops, provide insights into Minoan diet and agriculture. Even textiles and basketry have been preserved, offering rare glimpses into Minoan craft production. The urban planning at Akrotiri demonstrates sophisticated understanding of design principles and practical considerations. The town was laid out according to a regular plan, with paved streets, drainage systems, and multi-story buildings. The houses were equipped with sophisticated amenities, including indoor plumbing, built-in furniture, and elaborate decorative schemes. The level of urban sophistication at Akrotiri rivals that of much later civilizations. The frescoes from Akrotiri represent some of the finest examples of Minoan art ever discovered. The fisherman fresco depicts a young man carrying strings of fish, rendered with remarkable naturalistic detail. The blue monkey fresco shows monkeys in a rocky landscape, demonstrating the Minoan artist's familiarity with exotic animals, possibly through trade contacts with Egypt or other distant lands. Modern archaeological techniques have revolutionized our understanding of Minoan civilization. Ground-penetrating radar, satellite imagery, and other remote sensing technologies have revealed previously unknown sites and structures. Scientific analysis of pottery, metals, and other artifacts has provided new insights into Minoan trade networks, technological capabilities, and cultural connections. DNA analysis of human remains has begun to shed light on the ethnic composition and population movements in Bronze Age Crete. Ground-penetrating radar surveys at Minoan sites have revealed the existence of previously unknown structures and features. At Knossos, radar surveys have identified buried buildings and rooms that have not yet been excavated, suggesting that much of the palace complex remains to be discovered. Similar surveys at other sites have revealed the extent of ancient settlements and the locations of potential excavation targets. Satellite imagery and aerial photography have provided new perspectives on Minoan sites and their relationships to the surrounding landscape. These techniques have revealed ancient road systems, field boundaries, and settlement patterns that are not visible from ground level. The integration of satellite data with traditional archaeological methods has enhanced our understanding of Minoan land use and territorial organization. Scientific analysis of Minoan pottery has provided detailed information about production techniques, raw material sources, and trade relationships. Petrographic analysis, which involves examining thin sections of pottery under a microscope, can identify the geological sources of clay and temper materials. This information helps archaeologists trace trade routes and understand the organization of pottery production and distribution. Neutron activation analysis and other chemical techniques have been used to analyze the composition of Minoan metals, providing insights into ore sources and metallurgical techniques. These analyses have revealed that Minoan metalworkers used copper from Cyprus, tin from various sources, including possibly Britain, and silver from the Aegean islands. The sophisticated alloying techniques used by Minoan smiths demonstrate their advanced understanding of metallurgy. The study of Minoan agriculture has benefited greatly from advances in environmental archaeology. Analysis of pollen samples, plant remains, and soil deposits has revealed detailed information about Minoan farming practices, crop varieties, and environmental conditions. This research has shown that the Minoans were sophisticated agriculturalists who developed innovative techniques for maximizing productivity in their Mediterranean environment. They practiced crop rotation, used terracing to prevent soil erosion, and developed efficient irrigation systems to manage water resources. Palynological studies, which involve the analysis of ancient pollen preserved in soil and sediment samples, have provided detailed information about ancient vegetation and climate conditions. These studies have revealed that the Minoan period was characterized by relatively stable climate conditions that were favorable for agriculture. The pollen record also shows evidence for human impact on the landscape, including deforestation and the expansion of agricultural land. The analysis of plant remains for Minoan sites has provided direct evidence for the crops grown and the foods consumed by the Minoans. Carbonized grains, seeds, and other plant parts have been recovered from storage areas, cooking facilities, and refuse deposits. These remains show that the Minoans cultivated a diverse range of crops, including wheat, barley, lentils, peas, grapes, olives, and figs. Soil analysis at Minoan agricultural sites has revealed sophisticated farming techniques, including the use of terracing, irrigation, and soil amendment. The Minoans constructed extensive terrace systems to create arable land on steep hillsides, preventing soil erosion while maximizing agricultural productivity. These terraces required enormous investments of labor and demonstrate the Minoans' commitment to intensive agricultural development. Recent research has also focused on understanding Minoan maritime technology and navigation techniques. Experimental archaeology projects have attempted to reconstruct Minoan ships based on artistic depictions and archaeological evidence. These experiments have demonstrated that Minoan vessels were capable of long-distance voyages and could carry substantial cargoes, supporting the theory that the Minoans maintained extensive trade networks throughout the Mediterranean. The Minoans were essentially the ancient world's equivalent of a shipping company, except with more religious ceremonies and considerably more artistic flair. The reconstruction of Minoan ships has been based on artistic depictions found in frescoes, pottery, and other media, as well as archaeological evidence such as anchors, ship fittings, and harbor installations. The famous ship procession fresco from Akrotiri provides detailed information about Minoan vessel design, showing ships with distinctive curved prows and sterns, multiple oars, and elaborate decorative schemes. Experimental reconstructions of Minoan ships have been built and tested to evaluate their seaworthiness and cargo capacity. These experiments have demonstrated that Minoan vessels were capable of carrying substantial loads over long distances, supporting the theory that the Minoans maintained extensive trade networks throughout the Mediterranean. The ships were also shown to be relatively fast and maneuverable, important qualities for both trade and naval warfare. The study of ancient harbors and coastal installations has provided insights into Minoan maritime infrastructure. Archaeological surveys have identified ancient harbor works, including breakwaters, quays, and storage facilities at various sites around Crete. These installations demonstrate the importance of maritime activities too. Minoan civilization and the sophisticated engineering capabilities of Minoan builders. Navigation techniques used by Minoan sailors have been studied through analysis of ancient sailing conditions, wind patterns, and coastal features. The Minoans would have relied on celestial navigation, coastal landmarks, and knowledge of seasonal wind patterns to navigate across the Mediterranean. The development of these navigation skills was crucial to the success of Minoan trade networks and their dominance of Aegean maritime routes. The role of religion in Minoan society continues to be a subject of intense scholarly interest and debate. The absence of clearly identifiable temples in the traditional sense has led scholars to propose that Minoan religious practices were more diffuse and integrated into daily life than in other ancient civilizations. Sacred spaces included natural features such as caves and mountaintops, as well as specially designated rooms within palaces and houses. The famous snake goddess figurines and other religious artifacts suggest a complex pantheon of deities associated with fertility, nature, and the protection of households and communities. The integration of religious and secular activities in Minoan society is evident in the design and function of the palaces. Religious shrines and ceremonial rooms were incorporated into the same complexes that housed administrative offices, storage facilities, and residential quarters. This integration suggests that religious authority and political power were closely connected in Minoan society, with palace rulers serving important religious functions. The snake goddess figurines from Knossos represent some of the most famous examples of Minoan religious art. These faience figurines depict women wearing elaborate flounced skirts and tight-fitting bodices, holding snakes in their outstretched hands. The snakes were important symbols in Minoan religion, associated with fertility, regeneration, and the earth goddess. The figurines may represent actual priestesses or goddesses themselves. The sacred horns, or horns of consecration, were another important religious symbol in Minoan culture. These stylized bull's horns appear in various contexts throughout Minoan sites, carved in stone and placed on altars, rooftops, and other sacred locations. The horns may have represented the sacred bull, an important figure in Minoan religion, or they may have symbolized the crescent moon or other celestial phenomena. The double axe, or labyrinths, was perhaps the most important sacred symbol in Minoan religion. These ceremonial axes, often made of precious metals and decorated with elaborate designs, have been found in religious contexts throughout Crete. The symbol appears frequently in Minoan art, sometimes held by female figures who may represent priestesses or goddesses. The association of the double axe with female religious figures suggests that it may have been particularly connected to goddess worship and female religious authority. The question of human sacrifice in Minoan religion remains controversial and unresolved. Some archaeological evidence, including the discovery of what appears to be a sacrificial victim at Anemospilia, suggests that the Minoans may have practiced human sacrifice in extreme circumstances. However, the evidence is limited and ambiguous, and many scholars remain skeptical about the extent of such practices. The debate reflects broader questions about the nature of Minoan society and whether it was as peaceful and egalitarian as some scholars have suggested. The site of Anemospilia, located on the slopes of Mount Juctus near Knossos, has provided controversial evidence for possible human sacrifice in Minoan religion. The building appears to have been destroyed by earthquake while the religious ceremony was in progress, trapping the participants inside. The skeletal remains found at the site include what appears to be a young man lying on an altar with a bronze dagger nearby, suggesting that he may have been in the process of being sacrificed when the earthquake struck. However, the interpretation of this evidence remains debated, with some scholars arguing that the apparent sacrifice victim may have been a priest who died while attempting to perform emergency rituals to appease the gods during the earthquake. The controversy surrounding the Anemesphilia evidence reflects broader debates about the nature of Minoan society and religion. The traditional view of the Minoans as a peaceful, nature-loving civilization sits uncomfortably with evidence for human sacrifice, leading some scholars to question either the interpretation of the archaeological evidence or the romanticized view of Minoan society. The truth probably lies somewhere between these extremes, with Minoan society being neither as violent as some contemporary civilizations, nor as peaceful as sometimes portrayed. The study of Minoan art has revealed sophisticated aesthetic principles and technical capabilities that rival those of any ancient civilization. Minoan artists demonstrated mastery of various media, including fresco painting, pottery decoration, metalwork, and sculpture. Their artistic style emphasized naturalistic representation, dynamic movement, and harmonious composition. The famous Toreador fresco from Knossos, depicting young people performing acrobatic feats with bulls, exemplifies the Minoan ability to capture movement and energy in static artistic media. The technical aspects of Minoan fresco painting were remarkably sophisticated. The artists used the true fresco technique, applying pigments to wet lime plaster so that the colors became chemically bonded to the wall surface. This technique required great skill and speed, as the artist had to complete each section while the plaster was still wet. The durability of Minoan frescoes, many of which retain their vivid colors after more than 3,000 years, testifies to the technical mastery of Minoan painters. The color palette used by Minoan artists was rich and varied, including blues derived from Egyptian blue pigment, reds from iron oxides, yellows from ochres, and blacks from charcoal or manganese. The artists also used white lime plaster as a background color and to create highlights and details. The sophisticated use of color gradation and shading in Minoan frescoes demonstrates advanced understanding of artistic techniques that would not be seen again in European art for many centuries. The compositional principles employed by Minoan artists show sophisticated understanding of visual design and narrative structure. The famous procession fresco from Knossos, for example, uses a complex arrangement of figures to create a sense of movement and ceremony that draws the viewer's eye through the composition. The artist's ability to create convincing three-dimensional space on flat surfaces, using techniques such as overlapping figures and atmospheric perspective, demonstrates remarkable artistic sophistication. The influence of Minoan art on later Greek and Mediterranean cultures was profound and long-lasting. Minoan artistic motifs, decorative techniques, and aesthetic principles were adopted and adapted by the Mycenaeans and later transmitted to classical Greek civilization. Elements of Minoan artistic style can be traced through the development of Greek art, from the geometric period through the classical era. The Minoan emphasis on naturalistic representation and dynamic composition helped establish artistic traditions that would influence Western art for millennia. The transmission of Minoan artistic traditions to later cultures occurred through various mechanisms, including direct cultural contact, trade relationships, and population movements. Mycenaean artists working in Crete during the late Minoan period would have been exposed to Minoan artistic techniques and styles, which they then carried back to the Greek mainland. The continued production of Minoan-style artifacts during the post-palatial period also helped preserve these traditions for later transmission. The rediscovery of Minoan art in the modern era has had a significant impact on contemporary artistic movements. The naturalistic style and dynamic compositions of Minoan frescoes influenced Art Nouveau artists in the early 20th century, while the bold colors and abstract patterns of Minoan pottery have inspired modern ceramic artists. The continuing appeal of Minoan art demonstrates its enduring aesthetic value and its relevance to contemporary artistic sensibilities. The economic organization of Minoan society was remarkably sophisticated for its time. The palace-centered redistribution system allowed for efficient allocation of resources and supported specialized craft production. Archaeological evidence suggests that Minoan craftsmen achieved high levels of skill in various industries, including pottery production, metalworking, textile manufacture, and jewelry making. The quality and standardization of Minoan products indicate well-developed systems of training, quality control, and distribution. The redistribution system operated by Minoan palaces was based on the collection of agricultural surplus from the surrounding countryside and its redistribution according to established protocols. This system allowed for efficient resource allocation, risk management through storage of surplus production, and support for specialized craftsmen and officials who did not directly participate in agricultural production. The linear A tablets, though undeciphered, appear to document various aspects of this redistribution system. The standardization of Minoan products, particularly pottery and metalwork, suggests the existence of well-developed quality control systems and shared technical knowledge among craftsmen. The consistency of style and quality across different production centers indicates that Minoan artisans maintained high standards through formal or informal training systems. This standardization also facilitated trade, as customers throughout the Mediterranean world could rely on the consistent quality of Minoan products. The Minoan textile industry was particularly advanced, producing fine fabrics that were highly prized throughout the Mediterranean world. Evidence from linear B tablets and artistic depictions suggests that the Minoans produced a variety of textiles, including wool, linen, and possibly silk fabrics. The famous Ladies in Blue fresco from Knossos shows elaborately dressed women wearing what appear to be finely woven and decorated garments, indicating the high quality of Minoan textile production. The production of Minoan textiles involved sophisticated techniques for spinning, weaving, dyeing, and decoration. Archaeological evidence includes spindle whorls, loom weights, and other textile production equipment found at various sites. The linear B tablets from Knossos document large-scale textile production, with records of hundreds of workers involved in different aspects of the industry, from sheep herding and wool processing to weaving and finishing. The dyeing of Minoan textiles used various natural materials to create a range of colors. Purple dye, extracted from murex shells, was particularly prized and expensive, making purple-dyed textiles luxury items reserved for the elite. Other dyes were derived from plants, minerals, and insects, creating a palette that included reds, blues, yellows, and other colors. The sophisticated understanding of dyeing chemistry required to produce consistent, color-fast textiles demonstrates the advanced technical knowledge of Minoan craftsmen. Minoan metallurgy reached impressive levels of sophistication, with craftsmen producing not only functional tools and weapons, but also elaborate decorative objects. The famous harvester vase from Akrotiri, carved from steatite and decorated with scenes of agricultural workers, demonstrates the high level of skill achieved by Minoan stone carvers. Bronze working was particularly advanced, with Minoan smiths producing complex objects, such as the elaborate bronze figurines found at various sites across Crete. The bronze working techniques employed by Minoan smiths included casting, hammering, engraving, and inlay work. The famous bronze daggers from Shaft Grave 4 at Mycenaean, though found on the Greek mainland, were probably made by Minoan craftsmen and demonstrate the sophisticated techniques used in Minoan metalworking. The daggers feature elaborate inlay work with gold, silver, and niello, creating detailed scenes of hunting and warfare. The sources of metals used by Minoan smiths have been studied through chemical analysis of bronze artifacts. Copper was imported primarily from Cyprus, though some may have come from Anatolia or other sources. Tin, necessary for bronze production, was imported from various distant sources, possibly including Britain, Bohemia, or Anatolia. The ability to obtain these raw materials from distant sources demonstrates the extent and sophistication of Minoan trade networks. The production of gold and silver objects by Minoan craftsmen reached remarkable levels of artistic and technical achievement. The famous gold cups from Vaphio, though found on the Greek mainland, were probably made by Minoan artisans and demonstrate sophisticated techniques of repousse work and engraving. The cups depict scenes of bull capture with remarkable naturalistic detail and dynamic composition. The social organization of Minoan society remains a subject of ongoing research and debate. The absence of clearly identifiable royal burials or monumental royal art has led some scholars to suggest that Minoan society may have been less hierarchical than other contemporary civilizations. However, the existence of elaborate palaces and the evidence for specialized craft production suggest that significant social stratification did exist. The exact nature of Minoan political organization, whether it was based on kingship, priestly rule, or some other system, remains unclear due to our inability to read linear texts. The evidence for social stratification in Minoan society comes from various sources, including burial practices, housing patterns, and the distribution of luxury goods. Elite burials, such as those found in the Tholos tombs of the Messara plain, contain rich assemblages of gold jewelry, elaborate pottery, and other luxury items that indicate high social status. The contrast between these rich burials and simpler graves suggests significant differences in wealth and status within Minoan society. The housing patterns at Minoan sites also provide evidence for social differentiation. The palaces and large houses near palace centers were clearly occupied by elite individuals, while smaller houses in peripheral areas were probably occupied by craftsmen, farmers, and other non-elite groups. The size, construction quality, and decorative elaboration of houses generally correlate with the wealth and status of their occupants. The distribution of luxury goods, such as fine pottery, jewelry, and imported items, also reflects social stratification in Minoan society. These items are found primarily in palace contexts and elite houses, suggesting that access to luxury goods was restricted to high-status individuals. The concentration of craft production facilities in palace complexes also suggests that the production and distribution of high-quality goods was controlled by elite groups. The role of women in Minoan society appears to have been unusually prominent, at least among the elite classes. Artistic depictions show women participating in religious ceremonies, athletic competitions, and social gatherings. The famous snake goddess figurines suggest that female deities held important positions in the Minoan pantheon. Some scholars have proposed that Minoan society may have been matriarchal or matrilineal, though this interpretation remains controversial and is not universally accepted. The prominence of women in Minoan religious art is particularly striking when compared to other contemporary civilizations. Female figures appear frequently as priestesses, goddesses, and ritual participants in frescoes, sculptures, and other artistic works. The grandstand fresco from Knossos shows elaborately dressed women observing what appears to be a religious ceremony or athletic competition, suggesting that women played important roles as spectators and participants in public events. The clothing and hairstyles of women depicted in Minoan art suggest that they enjoyed considerable freedom and status in society. The elaborate dress, jewelry, and cosmetics shown in artistic depictions indicate that elite women had access to luxury goods and took pride in their appearance. The confident postures and animated gestures of women in Minoan art suggest that they were active participants in social and religious life rather than passive observers. The question of whether Minoan society was matriarchal remains highly debated among scholars. While women clearly played prominent roles in religion and possibly in other aspects of society, there is no clear evidence for female political leadership or matrilineal inheritance systems. The prominence of female religious figures may reflect the importance of goddess worship in Minoan religion rather than female political dominance. The Minoan approach to urban planning and architecture was innovative and sophisticated. Minoan settlements were typically unfortified, suggesting a relatively peaceful society or confidence in their naval defenses. The palaces were designed as multifunctional complexes that served administrative, religious, economic, and residential purposes. The famous drainage systems at Knossos and other sites demonstrate advanced understanding of hydraulic engineering and urban sanitation. The urban planning principles employed by Minoan architects show sophisticated understanding of functional and aesthetic considerations. The palaces were designed around central courtyards that served as focal points for various activities, while the surrounding buildings were arranged to facilitate efficient circulation and communication. The integration of storage, workshop, administrative, and residential functions within single complexes demonstrates advanced planning capabilities. The drainage and sanitation systems at Minoan sites were remarkably advanced for their time. The palace at Knossos featured sophisticated plumbing systems with terracotta pipes, stone drains, and even flush toilets. The famous Queen's bathroom at Knossos included a bathtub, wash basin, and toilet, all connected to an elaborate drainage system that carried wastewater away from the palace. The water supply systems at Minoan sites demonstrate sophisticated hydraulic engineering. The Minoans constructed aqueducts, cisterns, and wells to ensure adequate water supplies for their settlements. The famous aqueduct at Knossos carried water from springs in the nearby hills to the palace, using carefully calculated gradients to maintain water flow over long distances. The architectural techniques employed by Minoan builders included advanced methods for earthquake resistance, given Crete's location in a seismically active region. The use of wooden beams and flexible construction methods helped buildings withstand the frequent earthquakes that affected the island. The famous tapered columns of Minoan architecture, wider at the top and at the bottom, may have been designed to provide additional stability during seismic events. The relationship between the Minoans and their natural environment was complex and multifaceted. While they were skilled at exploiting natural resources and developing agricultural techniques suited to their Mediterranean environment, they also faced significant environmental challenges. The island of Crete is seismically active, and earthquakes periodically damaged Minoan settlements. The Minoans developed building techniques that were relatively earthquake-resistant, including the use of wooden beams and flexible construction methods. The environmental challenges faced by the Minoans included not only earthquakes, but also droughts, floods, and other natural disasters. The Mediterranean climate of Crete is characterized by wet winters and dry summers, with significant year-to-year variation in precipitation. The Minoans developed sophisticated water management systems to cope with these challenges, including cisterns for storing rainwater and irrigation systems for distributing water to agricultural areas. The exploitation of natural resources by the Minoans was intensive and sophisticated. They quarried stone for construction, mined metals where available, and harvested timber for building and fuel. The famous gypsum quarries near Knossos provided the distinctive white stone used in palace construction, while other quarries supplied limestone and other building materials. The intensive exploitation of these resources may have contributed to environmental degradation in some areas. The Minoans' relationship with the sea was fundamental to their civilization, providing both opportunities and challenges. The sea offered access to trade routes and fishing grounds, but also posed dangers from storms, pirates, and naval warfare. The Minoans developed sophisticated maritime technologies and navigation, techniques to exploit the opportunities while minimizing the risks. The marine environment around Crete was rich in resources that the Minoans exploited for both subsistence and trade. Fish and shellfish provided important protein sources, while marine products such as purple dye from murex shells were valuable trade commodities. The Minoans also harvested sea salt, which was essential for food preservation and was another important trade item. The decline and fall of Minoan civilization remains one of the most debated topics in Bronze Age archaeology. Multiple factors likely contributed to the collapse, including natural disasters, economic disruption, political instability, and external invasion. The Thera eruption, while not immediately catastrophic, may have weakened Minoan society and created opportunities for competitors. The rise of Mycenaean power on the Greek mainland posed an increasing challenge to Minoan dominance in the Aegean. The process of Minoan decline was gradual and complex, involving multiple interacting factors rather than a single catastrophic cause. The Thera eruption around 1628 BCE may have initiated the decline by disrupting trade networks and damaging coastal settlements, but Minoan civilization continued for several more decades. The final destruction of the palaces around 1450 BC marked the end of the palace period, but Minoan culture continued in modified forms during the post-palatial period. The role of natural disasters in Minoan decline cannot be underestimated. Crete's location in a seismically active region meant that earthquakes were a constant threat, and several major earthquakes are documented in the archaeological record. The Thera eruption, while not directly destroying Minoan civilization, may have had significant indirect effects through climate change, agricultural disruption, and economic instability. The economic factors contributing to Minoan decline may have included the disruption of trade networks, competition from other Mediterranean powers, and internal economic problems. The complex redistribution system that supported Minoan civilization required stable agricultural production and successful trade relationships. Any disruption to these systems could have had cascading effects throughout Minoan society. The political factors in Minoan decline may have included internal conflicts, succession disputes, and challenges to traditional authority structures. The absence of clear evidence for Minoan political organization makes it difficult to understand these factors, but the simultaneous destruction of multiple palace sites suggests either coordinated external attack or widespread internal upheaval. The transition from Minoan to Mycenaean control of Crete was probably gradual rather than sudden. Archaeological evidence suggests a period of cultural blending during which Minoan and Mycenaean elements coexisted and influenced each other. The adoption of linear B script at Knossos indicates that Greek-speaking administrators had gained control of the palace, but Minoan cultural traditions continued in modified forms. The Mycenaean takeover of Crete may have been motivated by economic and strategic considerations rather than simple conquest. Crete's strategic location in the eastern Mediterranean and its established trade networks would have made it an attractive target for the expanding Mycenaean civilization. The Mycenaeans may have initially established trading posts or diplomatic relations with Minoan centers before gradually assuming political control. The evidence for Mycenaean presence in Crete during the late Minoan period includes not only the linear B tablets, but also changes in material culture, burial practices, and architectural styles. Mycenaean-style pottery appears at Cretan sites, while burial practices begin to incorporate Mycenaean elements, such as the inclusion of weapons and graves. These changes suggest a gradual process of cultural transformation, rather than sudden conquest. The final centuries of Minoan civilization, known as the Post-palatial period, were characterized by political fragmentation and cultural change. The centralized palace system that had coordinated Minoan society for over a millennium collapsed, and Crete was divided among smaller political units. Some Minoan traditions persisted, particularly in rural areas, but the distinctive palace-centered culture that had defined Minoan civilization came to an end. The post-palatial period settlements show significant changes from earlier Minoan practices. Many sites were fortified for the first time, suggesting increased concern about security and warfare. The famous site of Carphi, located on a remote mountaintop in eastern Crete, represents a typical post-palatial settlement with its defensive location and simple architecture. These changes suggest that the peaceful conditions that had characterized earlier Minoan civilization had given way to a more unstable and dangerous environment. The material culture of the post-palatial period shows a mixture of Minoan and Mycenaean elements, reflecting the cultural blending that characterized this transitional era. Pottery styles incorporated both traditional Minoan decorative motifs and Mycenaean vessel forms, creating hybrid styles that reflected the mixed cultural environment. Similarly, religious practices combined traditional Minoan elements with new practices possibly introduced by Mycenaean settlers. The economic systems of the post-palatial period were much simpler than those of the palace period. The complex redistribution networks that had characterized Minoan civilization were replaced by more localized exchange systems. Craft production continued, but at a reduced scale and level of sophistication. The fine pottery and elaborate metalwork that had been hallmarks of Minoan civilization became increasingly rare, replaced by simpler, more utilitarian products. The religious practices of the post-palatial period show both continuity and change compared to earlier Minoan traditions. Traditional sacred sites, such as caves and mountaintop sanctuaries, continued to be used, but the elaborate palace-based religious ceremonies of the earlier period disappeared. New religious practices, possibly introduced by Mycenaean settlers, were integrated with traditional Minoan beliefs, creating syncretic religious systems that combined elements from both cultures. The population of Crete during the post-palatial period appears to have declined significantly from the levels reached during the palace period. Many settlements were abandoned entirely, while others were reduced to small villages. The complex social hierarchies that had characterized Minoan civilization were simplified, and the specialized craft production that had created the beautiful artifacts for which the Minoans are famous largely disappeared. The artistic traditions of the post-palatial period were much simpler than those of the palace period. The elaborate frescoes, fine pottery, and sophisticated metalwork that had characterized Minoan civilization were replaced by simple, utilitarian products. The naturalistic artistic style that had been a hallmark of Minoan art was largely abandoned in favor of geometric patterns and abstract designs. The final collapse of Bronze Age civilization in the Aegean around 1200 BCE, part of the broader Late Bronze Age collapse that affected much of the eastern Mediterranean, marked the end of organized Minoan culture. The causes of this collapse remain debated, but probably included a combination of natural disasters, economic disruption, population movements, and political instability. The collapse was so thorough that knowledge of Minoan civilization was almost completely lost, surviving only in fragmentary form in later Greek mythology. The Late Bronze Age collapse was a catastrophic event that affected civilizations throughout the eastern Mediterranean. The Mycenaean palaces on the Greek mainland were destroyed, the Hittite Empire in Anatolia collapsed, and many cities in the Levant were abandoned. The causes of this widespread collapse remain debated, but may have included climate change, population movements, internal social upheaval, and the disruption of trade networks. The effects of the Late Bronze Age collapse on Crete were severe and long-lasting. The remaining Minoan settlements were abandoned or drastically reduced in size, and the island entered a dark age that lasted for several centuries. The sophisticated artistic traditions, complex administrative systems, and extensive trade networks that had characterized Minoan civilization disappeared, not to be equaled again in the Aegean for many centuries. The Sea Peoples, mysterious groups of maritime raiders who appear in Egyptian and other Near Eastern records during the Late Bronze Age collapse, may have played a role in the final destruction of Minoan civilization. These groups, whose origins and identities remain debated, attacked settlements throughout the eastern Mediterranean and may have contributed to the general instability that characterized the period. The Dark Age that followed the Bronze Age collapse lasted for several centuries and was characterized by population decline, economic simplification, and cultural regression. During this period, the magnificent palaces of the Minoans were abandoned and gradually buried under accumulated debris. The sophisticated artistic traditions, complex administrative systems, and extensive trade networks that had characterized Minoan civilization disappeared, not to be equaled again in the Aegean for many centuries. The preservation of Minoan sites during the Dark Age was largely accidental, resulting from natural processes of burial and abandonment rather than deliberate conservation efforts. The dry Mediterranean climate helped preserve organic materials that would have decayed in more humid environments, while the accumulation of soil and debris protected architectural remains from destruction. The volcanic ash from the Thera eruption provided exceptional preservation conditions at sites like Akrotiri, creating a unique archaeological time capsule. The memory of Minoan civilization was largely lost during the Dark Age, surviving only in fragmentary form in later Greek mythology. The stories of King Minos, the labyrinth, and the Minotaur preserve some memory of Crete's ancient importance, but these mythological traditions bore little resemblance to the actual historical reality of Minoan civilization. The Greeks of the classical period had no knowledge of the sophisticated Bronze Age civilization that had flourished on Crete more than 1,000 years earlier. The gradual recovery of Greek civilization during the Archaic period, 8th-6th centuries BCE, saw the reestablishment of trade networks, urban centers, and complex political systems in the Aegean. However, this new Greek civilization was quite different from its Bronze Age predecessors, with different languages, religious practices, and cultural traditions. The continuity between Minoan civilization and later Greek culture was limited, mediated primarily through the Mycenaeans and preserved mainly in mythological traditions. The rediscovery of Minoan civilization in the modern era began with the pioneering work of Sir Arthur Evans at Knossos in the early 20th century. Evans, a British archaeologist with a flair for dramatic interpretation and an unfortunate tendency to reconstruct ancient buildings according to his own aesthetic preferences, began excavating at Knossos in 1900. His work revealed the existence of a sophisticated Bronze Age civilization that had been completely forgotten by history, buried beneath centuries of accumulated debris and historical amnesia. Arthur Evans was born into a wealthy British family with interests in archaeology and ancient history. His father, Sir John Evans, was a prominent archaeologist and numismatist, while Arthur himself studied at Oxford and developed interests in Balkan history and ancient writing systems. His initial interest in Crete was sparked by his discovery of ancient seal stones in antique shops in Athens, which led him to investigate their possible Cretan origins. Evans' first visit to Crete in 1894 convinced him that the island contained important archaeological remains that had not been properly investigated. He was particularly intrigued by the large mound at Knossos, which local tradition associated with ancient ruins. After Crete gained independence from Ottoman rule in 1898, Evans was able to purchase the site and begin systematic excavations. The early years of Evans' excavations at Knossos were extraordinarily productive, revealing the existence of a sophisticated Bronze Age palace complex that was unlike anything previously known from prehistoric Europe. The discovery of elaborate frescoes, sophisticated architecture, and evidence for a writing system revolutionized understanding of European prehistory and established the existence of Europe's first advanced civilization. Evans' excavations at Knossos were groundbreaking in their scope and methodology, though his reconstruction techniques would make modern archaeologists break out in cold sweats. He not only uncovered the remains of the ancient palace, but also undertook extensive restoration work, using concrete and modern materials to rebuild walls, columns, and even entire rooms. While these reconstructions have been criticized for their historical accuracy, they did succeed in giving visitors a sense of the scale and grandeur of the original palace. Evans' work was like historical fan fiction, creative, engaging, but not always faithful to the source material. The reconstruction work at Knossos was controversial from the beginning, with some scholars arguing that Evans was creating a modern interpretation of ancient architecture rather than accurately restoring the original buildings. Evans used reinforced concrete to rebuild walls and columns, painted modern frescoes to replace damaged ancient ones, and even installed modern amenities such as electric lighting. While these interventions have been criticized, they did make the site accessible to visitors and helped popularize knowledge of Minoan civilization. Evan's interpretation of Minoan civilization was heavily influenced by his own cultural background and the intellectual climate of early 20th century Europe. He portrayed the Minoans as a peaceful, artistic people who represented an idealized vision of ancient civilization. This romantic interpretation, while not entirely accurate, captured the public imagination and helped establish the popular image of Minoan civilization that persists today. The discovery of the Minoan civilization revolutionized understanding of Bronze Age Europe and the development of early Greek civilization. Before Evan's work, scholars believed that European civilization had begun with the classical Greeks around the 8th century BCE. Revelation that a sophisticated civilization had flourished on Crete more than 1,000 years earlier forced a complete reassessment of European prehistory. The Minoans were suddenly recognized as Europe's first advanced civilization, predating not only classical Greece, but even Mycenaean Greece by several centuries. The impact of Evan's discoveries extended far beyond academic archaeology. The revelation that Europe had produced an advanced civilization during the Bronze Age challenged prevailing assumptions about the development of human civilization and the relationship between Europe and the ancient Near East. The Minoans demonstrated that sophisticated urban civilizations could develop independently in Europe without direct influence from Egypt or Mesopotamia. Evans named the civilization Minoan after the legendary king Minos of Crete, who appears in Greek mythology as the ruler of a powerful maritime empire and the owner of the famous labyrinth that housed the Minotaur. While the historical existence of King Minos remains unproven, the choice of name proved remarkably apt, as the Minoans did indeed rule a maritime empire, and their palace at Knossos, with its complex layout of interconnected rooms and corridors, could easily be described as labyrinthine. The connection between the archaeological Minoans and the mythological King Minos remains a subject of scholarly debate. Some scholars argue that the myths preserve genuine historical memories of Minoan civilization, while others contend that the similarities are coincidental. The truth probably lies somewhere between these extremes, with the myths containing some historical elements that have been heavily transformed by centuries of oral transmission. The labyrinth myth in particular may preserve memories of the complex layout of Minoan palaces. The word labyrinth itself may be derived from labyres, the double axe that was an important symbol in Minoan religion. The association of the labyrinth with bull sacrifice in the myth may reflect the importance of bulls in Minoan religious practices, though the specific details of the Minotaur story are probably later mythological elaborations. The decipherment of Linear B script in 1952 by Michael Ventris provided crucial insights into the final period of Minoan civilization and its relationship with the Mycenaeans. Ventris, a British architect and amateur linguist who approached the problem with the systematic methodology of his professional training, demonstrated that Linear B was used to write an early form of Greek. This discovery confirmed that Greek-speaking peoples had indeed gained control of Knossos and possibly other parts of Crete during the final centuries of Minoan civilization. Michael Ventris's background as an architect proved crucial to his success in deciphering Linear B. His training in structural analysis and systematic problem-solving provided him with the methodological tools needed to tackle the complex puzzle of an unknown script. Ventris approached the decipherment as an engineering problem, using statistical analysis and pattern recognition to identify the underlying structure of the writing system. The breakthrough in Linear B decipherment came when Ventris realized that certain frequently occurring sign groups might represent place names known from classical Greek sources. By assuming that these sign groups represented places like Knossos, Phaistos, and Amnisos, he was able to assign sound values to individual signs and begin reading the tablets. The discovery that the language was Greek was initially surprising, as most scholars had expected Linear B to record in non-Greek language. The decipherment of Linear B revolutionized understanding of Late Bronze Age Greece and provided direct textual evidence for the relationship between Minoan and Mycenaean civilizations. The tablets revealed that the final phase of occupation at Knossos was indeed controlled by Greek-speaking administrators who had adapted the Minoan writing system to record their own language. This discovery confirmed theories about Mycenaean expansion into Crete and provided detailed information about the administration of the late Minoan palace. The Linear B tablets from Knossos provide detailed information about the administration of the palace during its final period. These records document everything from livestock inventories to religious offerings, providing insights into the economic and social organization of late Minoan society. The tablets reveal a highly bureaucratic system with specialized officials responsible for different aspects of palace administration, from shepherds and craftsmen to religious functionaries and military personnel. The administrative system revealed by the Linear B tablets was remarkably detailed and comprehensive. Palace officials maintained careful records of land tenure, livestock management, craft production, and religious activities. The system appears to have been highly centralized, with palace bureaucrats exercising detailed control over economic activities throughout the surrounding territory. The level of bureaucratic control documented in the tablets suggests a complex and sophisticated administrative system that required extensive record-keeping and coordination. The livestock records in the Linear B tablets provide fascinating insights into the scale and organization of animal husbandry in late Minoan Crete. The tablets document enormous flocks of sheep, some individual flocks numbered in the thousands, as well as substantial herds of cattle, pigs, and goats. The detailed recording of these animals, including their locations, owners, and purposes, suggests that livestock management was a major component of the palace economy and required careful administrative oversight. The craft production records in the Linear B tablets reveal the continued importance of specialized manufacturing in late Minoan society. The tablets document the production of textiles, pottery, metalwork, and other goods, often specifying the materials used, the quantities produced, and the intended recipients. The system appears to have maintained the high standards of craftsmanship that had characterized earlier Minoan production, though under Mycenaean administrative control. The religious information contained in the Linear B tablets provides fascinating insights into the blending of Minoan and Mycenaean religious traditions during this period. The tablets mention various deities, including some that are clearly recognizable as later Greek gods and goddesses, alongside others that may represent traditional Minoan divinities. This religious syncretism suggests that the Mycenaean takeover of Crete involved not just political conquest, but also cultural accommodation and blending. The failure to decipher Linear A script remains one of the great frustrations of Minoan studies. Despite decades of effort by skilled linguists and cryptographers, the earlier Minoan script continues to resist all attempts at decipherment. The problem is compounded by the relatively small number of Linear A texts that have survived and the lack of bilingual inscriptions that might provide a key to understanding the script. Without the ability to read Linear A, our understanding of Minoan religion, politics, and daily life remains frustratingly incomplete. The challenges facing Linear A decipherment are formidable and multifaceted. Unlike Linear B, which was deciphered with the help of known place names and the recognition that it recorded an early form of Greek, Linear A appears to record a completely unknown language. The script contains approximately 90 different signs, suggesting a syllabic writing system similar to Linear B. But without knowledge of the underlying language, it is extremely difficult to assign sound values to the individual signs. Various approaches have been attempted in efforts to decipher Linear A sum. Scholars have tried to apply the sound values derived from Linear B to Linear A signs, assuming that the two scripts share similar phonetic values. Others have attempted to identify the underlying language by comparing Linear A with various known language families, including Indo-European, Semitic, and Anatolian languages. However, none of these approaches has produced convincing results, and Linear A remains undeciphered. The content of Linear A texts appears to be primarily administrative, similar to the Linear B tablets, but presumably recording the activities of Minoan rather than Mycenaean administrators. Many tablets contain lists of numbers and commodity signs, suggesting inventories or transaction records. Others appear to record religious offerings or ceremonial activities based on their context of discovery and the presence of religious symbols. The administrative nature of most Linear A texts suggests that decipherment would provide valuable insights into Minoan economic and social organization. The geographic distribution of Linear A texts provides important information about the extent and organization of Minoan civilization. Linear A tablets have been found at numerous sites across Crete, including all the major palace centers and many smaller settlements. The script was also used on other Aegean islands, including Thera, Chaia, and Melos, suggesting that Minoan administrative practices and possibly political control extended throughout the southern Aegean. The widespread use of Linear A demonstrates the extent of Minoan cultural influence and suggests a high degree of administrative standardization across the Minoan world. The temporal distribution of Linear A texts spans the entire Middle and Late Minoan periods, from approximately 1800 to 1450 BCE. The earliest examples come from Middle Minoan contexts at sites like Phaistos and Knossos, while the latest examples date to the final destruction of the palaces around 1450 BCE. This long period of use suggests that Linear A was a stable and well-established writing system that served the administrative needs of Minoan civilization for several centuries. The relationship between Linear A and Linear B scripts is complex and not fully understood. While Linear B clearly derives from Linear A, with many signs being directly borrowed or adapted, the two scripts also show significant differences. Some Linear A signs have no equivalents in Linear B, while some Linear B signs appear to be innovations not found in the earlier script. These differences may reflect changes in the underlying languages being recorded, adaptations to different phonological systems, or simply evolutionary changes in the writing system over time. Archaeological work at Minoan sites has continued throughout the 20th and 21st centuries, gradually building a more complete picture of Minoan civilization. Excavations at sites such as Phaistos, Mallia, Zakros, and Akrotiri on Thera have revealed the diversity and complexity of Minoan culture. Each site has contributed unique insights into different aspects of Minoan life, from the sophisticated urban planning at Akrotiri to the elaborate religious installations at Zakros. Modern archaeological techniques have revolutionized the study of Minoan civilization, providing new insights into previously unknown aspects of Minoan culture. Ground-penetrating radar and other remote sensing technologies have revealed buried structures and settlement patterns, while scientific analysis of artifacts has provided information about trade networks, technological capabilities, and cultural connections. DNA analysis of human remains has begun to shed light on population movements and ethnic composition in Bronze Age Crete. The application of scientific methods to Minoan archaeology has produced remarkable results. Radiocarbon dating has provided precise chronologies for Minoan sites and helped establish the timing of major events such as the Thera eruption. Isotope analysis of human and animal remains has provided information about diet, migration patterns, and trade relationships. Chemical analysis of pottery and metals has revealed information about production techniques and raw material sources. Ground-penetrating radar surveys at Minoan sites have revealed the existence of previously unknown structures and features. At Knossos, radar surveys have identified buried buildings and rooms that have not yet been excavated, suggesting that much of the palace complex remains to be discovered. Similar surveys at other sites have revealed the extent of ancient settlements and the locations of potential excavation targets. Satellite imagery and aerial photography have provided new perspectives on Minoan sites and their relationships to the surrounding landscape. These techniques have revealed ancient road systems, field boundaries, and settlement patterns that are not visible from ground level. The integration of satellite data with traditional archaeological methods has enhanced our understanding of Minoan land use and territorial organization. The study of Minoan environmental archaeology has revealed important information about ancient climate conditions, agricultural practices, and human-environment interactions. Analysis of pollen samples, plant remains, and soil deposits has shown how the Minoans adapted their farming practices to local environmental conditions and how they managed natural resources. This research has also provided insights into the environmental impacts of the Thera eruption and other natural disasters. Palynological studies have provided detailed information about ancient vegetation and climate conditions during the Minoan period. These studies have revealed that the Minoan period was characterized by relatively stable climate conditions that were favorable for agriculture. The pollen record also shows evidence for human impact on the landscape, including deforestation and the expansion of agricultural land. The analysis of plant remains for Minoan sites has provided direct evidence for the crops grown and the foods consumed by the Minoans. Carbonized grains, seeds, and other plant parts have been recovered from storage areas, cooking facilities, and refuse deposits. These remains show that the Minoans cultivated a diverse range of crops, including wheat, barley, lentils, peas, grapes, olives, and figs. Soil analysis at Minoan agricultural sites has revealed sophisticated farming techniques, including the use of terracing, irrigation, and soil amendment. The Minoans constructed extensive terrace systems to create arable land on steep hillsides, preventing soil erosion while maximizing agricultural productivity. These terraces required enormous investments of labor and demonstrate the Minoans' commitment to intensive agricultural development. Recent research has also focused on understanding Minoan maritime technology and navigation techniques. Experimental archaeology projects have attempted to reconstruct Minoan ships based on artistic depictions and archaeological evidence. These experiments have demonstrated that Minoan vessels were capable of long-distance voyages and could carry substantial cargoes, supporting the theory that the Minoans maintained extensive trade networks throughout the Mediterranean. The reconstruction of Minoan ships has been based on artistic depictions found in frescoes, pottery, and other media, as well as archaeological evidence such as anchors, ship fittings, and harbor installations. The famous ship procession fresco from Akrotiri provides detailed information about Minoan vessel design, showing ships with distinctive curved prows and sterns, multiple oars, and elaborate decorative schemes. Experimental reconstructions of Minoan ships have been built and tested to evaluate their seaworthiness and cargo capacity. These experiments have demonstrated that Minoan vessels were capable of carrying substantial loads over long distances, supporting the theory that the Minoans maintained extensive trade networks throughout the Mediterranean. The ships were also shown to be relatively fast and maneuverable, important qualities for both trade and naval warfare. The study of ancient harbors and coastal installations has provided insights into Minoan maritime infrastructure. Archaeological surveys have identified ancient harbor works, including breakwaters, quays, and storage facilities at various sites around Crete. These installations demonstrate the importance of maritime activities to Minoan civilization and the sophisticated engineering capabilities of Minoan builders. Navigation techniques used by Minoan sailors have been studied through analysis of ancient sailing conditions, wind patterns, and coastal features. The Minoans would have relied on celestial navigation, coastal landmarks, and knowledge of seasonal wind patterns to navigate across the Mediterranean. The development of these navigation skills was crucial to the success of Minoan trade networks and their dominance of Aegean maritime routes. The legacy of Minoan civilization extended far beyond the end of the palace period. Minoan artistic styles, religious practices, and technological innovations influenced the development of later Greek civilization and, through the Greeks, the broader Mediterranean world. The Mycenaeans adopted many Minoan cultural elements, which they then transmitted to later Greek societies. Elements of Minoan religion, particularly the worship of a mother goddess figure, can be traced through later Greek religious practices and may have influenced the development of classical Greek mythology. The transmission of Minoan cultural elements to later civilizations occurred through various mechanisms. Direct cultural contact during the late Minoan period allowed Mycenaean Greeks to observe and adopt Minoan practices. The continued occupation of Crete by Greek-speaking peoples during the Post-palatial period provided opportunities for the preservation and transmission of Minoan traditions. Trade relationships and population movements also facilitated the spread of Minoan cultural elements throughout the Mediterranean world. The influence of Minoan art on later Greek artistic traditions is particularly evident in the development of naturalistic representation and decorative motifs. The Minoan emphasis on natural forms, dynamic movement, and harmonious composition can be traced through the development of Greek art from the geometric period through the classical era. Specific motifs such as marine creatures, plant forms, and religious symbols appear in later Greek art, though often in modified or stylized forms. The religious influences of Minoan civilization on later Greek religion are complex and difficult to trace precisely. However, certain elements of classical Greek religion, particularly the worship of female deities and the importance of nature worship, may have Minoan origins. The Greek goddess Athena, for example, shares some characteristics with Minoan snake goddesses, while the importance of bulls in Greek religious practices may reflect Minoan influences. The technological innovations of Minoan civilization also influenced later Mediterranean cultures. Minoan advances in metallurgy, ceramics, architecture, and engineering were transmitted to the Mycenaeans, and through them to later Greek civilization. The sophisticated drainage systems, earthquake-resistant construction techniques, and urban planning principles developed by the Minoans influenced the development of later Mediterranean cities. The mythological traditions preserved by the Greeks contain important memories of Minoan civilization, though these memories are heavily transformed by centuries of oral transmission. The stories of King Minos, the labyrinth, and the Minotaur preserve some awareness of Crete's ancient importance and its association with maritime power and sophisticated architecture. However, these mythological traditions should be interpreted cautiously, as they reflect later Greek perspectives rather than accurate historical memories. The rediscovery of Minoan civilization in the modern era has had a profound impact on our understanding of European prehistory and the development of Western civilization. The Minoans demonstrated that sophisticated urban civilizations could develop in Europe much earlier than previously believed. Their achievements in art, architecture, technology, and social organization rivaled those of contemporary civilizations in Egypt and Mesopotamia. The impact of Minoan discoveries on modern scholarship has been transformative. The revelation that Europe had produced an advanced Bronze Age civilization forced a complete reassessment of European prehistory and the development of Western civilization. The Minoans are now recognized as Europe's first advanced civilization, predating classical Greece by more than a millennium and demonstrating the antiquity and sophistication of European cultural development. Modern scholarship on Minoan civilization continues to evolve as new archaeological discoveries and analytical techniques provide fresh insights. Recent excavations have revealed previously unknown aspects of Minoan culture, while scientific analysis of artifacts and environmental data has refined our understanding of Minoan technology, trade networks, and environmental adaptations. The application of digital technologies including 3D modeling and virtual reality, has opened new possibilities for studying and presenting Minoan sites and artifacts. The study of Minoan civilization has also contributed to broader discussions about the nature of ancient societies and the factors that contribute to cultural development and decline. The Minoans' apparent emphasis on trade rather than conquest, their sophisticated artistic traditions, and their relatively peaceful society have made them attractive to modern scholars and the general public. However, it is important to avoid romanticizing Minoan civilization or projecting modern values onto ancient societies. The question of Minoan ethnicity and language remains unresolved and continues to generate scholarly debate. The undeciphered linear A script prevents us from knowing what language the Minoans spoke or how they identified themselves ethnically. Various theories have been proposed, ranging from connections to Anatolian peoples to indigenous Mediterranean populations, but none has gained universal acceptance. The ethnic composition of Minoan society may have been complex, involving multiple population groups that merged over time. Recent genetic studies of ancient DNA from Minoan sites have begun to provide new insights into the ethnic composition and population history of Bronze Age, Crete. These studies suggest that the Minoans were descended from Neolithic farmers who had migrated to Crete from Anatolia, with some additional genetic contributions from other Mediterranean populations. However, the genetic evidence is still limited, and more research is needed to fully understand Minoan population history. The environmental context of Minoan civilization has received increased attention in recent years, as scholars have recognized the importance of climate and environmental factors in cultural development. The Mediterranean climate of Crete, with its mild, wet winters and hot, dry summers, was well suited to the cultivation of olives, grapes, and grains that formed the basis of the Minoan economy. However, the Minoans also had to cope with environmental challenges, including earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, and periodic droughts. Climate reconstruction studies have provided detailed information about environmental conditions during the Minoan period. These studies suggest that the Middle and Late Minoan periods were characterized by relatively stable climate conditions that were favorable for agriculture and economic development. However, there is also evidence for periodic climate fluctuations that may have affected agricultural productivity and contributed to social and economic instability. The Minoan approach to international relations appears to have emphasized trade and cultural exchange rather than military conquest. Unlike many contemporary civilizations that expanded through warfare and territorial conquest, the Minoans seem to have preferred to establish trading relationships and cultural connections. This approach was probably facilitated by their naval supremacy, which allowed them to control sea routes without necessarily occupying foreign territories. The concept of Minoan thalassocracy or sea empire has been debated among scholars. While the Minoans clearly dominated maritime trade in the Aegean during the Middle and Late Bronze Ages, the extent to which this constituted a formal political empire remains unclear. The Minoan presence at sites throughout the Aegean may have been primarily commercial rather than political, though the distinction between economic and political control may not have been as clear in the Bronze Age as it is today. The technological achievements of the Minoans were impressive for their time and included innovations in metallurgy, ceramics, architecture, and engineering. Their bronze working techniques were among the most advanced in the Bronze Age world, and their pottery production achieved levels of artistic and technical excellence that were not surpassed until much later periods. The sophisticated drainage and water management systems at Minoan sites demonstrate advanced understanding of hydraulic engineering. The Minoan innovations in architecture and engineering had lasting influences on later Mediterranean civilizations. The use of light wells for natural illumination, sophisticated drainage systems, and earthquake-resistant construction techniques were adopted by later builders throughout the region. The integration of functional and aesthetic considerations in Minoan architecture established principles that influenced the development of classical Greek architecture. The religious beliefs and practices of the Minoans remain partially mysterious due to our inability to read the religious texts, but archaeological evidence provides important insights. Minoan religion appears to have emphasized fertility, nature worship, and the protection of communities and households. The prominence of female deities and the apparent importance of priestesses suggest that women played significant roles in religious life. Sacred symbols such as the double axe, sacred horns, and the sacred knot appear frequently in religious contexts. The integration of religious and secular activities in Minoan society is evident in the design and function of the palaces. Religious shrines and ceremonial rooms were incorporated into the same complexes that housed administrative offices, storage facilities, and residential quarters. This integration suggests that religious authority and political power were closely connected in Minoan society, with palace rulers serving important religious functions. The artistic legacy of Minoan civilization is perhaps their most enduring contribution to world culture. Minoan frescoes, pottery, and other artistic works demonstrate sophisticated aesthetic sensibilities and technical skills that influenced later Mediterranean cultures. The Minoan emphasis on naturalistic representation, dynamic composition, and harmonious color schemes established artistic traditions that can be traced through the development of Western art. The influence of Minoan art on later cultures extended far beyond the immediate Aegean region. Through trade contacts and cultural exchange, Minoan artistic styles and motifs spread throughout the Eastern Mediterranean. The naturalistic representation of animals and plants, the use of marine motifs, and the emphasis on movement and energy in artistic compositions became characteristic features of later Mediterranean art traditions. The economic system of Minoan civilization was based on a combination of agriculture, craft production, and long-distance trade. The palace-centered redistribution system allowed for efficient resource allocation and supported specialized production. Archaeological evidence suggests that Minoan merchants maintained trading relationships throughout the Mediterranean world, exchanging Cretan products for raw materials and luxury goods from distant lands. The sophistication of the Minoan economy is demonstrated by the standardization of weights and measures, the development of complex accounting systems, and the maintenance of extensive trade networks. The linear A tablets, though undeciphered, appear to document various aspects of economic activity, including production quotas, inventory management, and resource allocation. The level of economic organization required to support the palace complexes and their associated activities was remarkable for the Bronze Age. The social structure of Minoan society appears to have been hierarchical, but may have been less rigid than in other contemporary civilizations. The prominence of women in artistic depictions and religious contexts suggests that gender roles may have been more flexible than in other ancient societies. However, our understanding of Minoan social organization remains limited by the lack of deciphered texts and the fragmentary nature of the archaeological record. The evidence for social stratification in Minoan society comes from various sources, including burial practices, housing patterns, and the distribution of luxury goods. Elite burials contain rich assemblages of gold jewelry, elaborate pottery, and other luxury items, while simpler graves suggest lower social status. The palaces and large houses near palace centers were clearly occupied by elite individuals, while smaller houses in peripheral areas were probably occupied by craftsmen, farmers, and other non-elite groups. The urban planning and architecture of Minoan settlements demonstrates sophisticated understanding of design principles and practical considerations. The palaces were designed as integrated complexes that efficiently combined multiple functions, while the drainage and sanitation systems show advanced engineering capabilities. The absence of fortifications at most Minoan sites suggests either a peaceful society or confidence in naval defenses. The architectural innovations of the Minoans included advanced techniques for earthquake resistance, improved drainage systems, and sophisticated lighting solutions. The use of light wells and clerestory windows provided natural illumination to interior spaces, while the integration of gardens and courtyards created pleasant living environments. The famous tapered columns of Minoan architecture may have been designed to provide additional stability during seismic events. The decline of Minoan civilization was probably caused by a combination of factors rather than a single catastrophic event. Natural disasters, including earthquakes and the Thera eruption, may have weakened Minoan society and disrupted trade networks. The rise of Mycenaean power on the Greek mainland created new competition for control of Aegean trade routes and may have led to direct military confrontation. Internal social and political problems may have made Minoan society less able to respond effectively to external challenges. The process of decline was gradual and complex, involving multiple interacting factors that weakened the foundations of Minoan civilization over several generations. The resilience that had allowed Minoan society to recover from earlier disasters, such as the earthquakes that destroyed the first palaces around 1700 BCE, appears to have been exhausted by the cumulative effects of environmental, economic, and political pressures during the late Minoan period. The environmental factors contributing to Minoan decline included not only the dramatic Thera eruption, but also more subtle long-term changes in climate and agricultural productivity. Paleoclimatic evidence suggests that the late Minoan period may have experienced increased climatic variability, with more frequent droughts and extreme weather events that would have stressed agricultural systems and reduced the surplus production that supported the palace economies. The economic factors in Minoan decline were closely related to environmental challenges, but also included increased competition from other Mediterranean powers and possible disruption of traditional trade networks. The rise of Mycenaean civilization on the Greek mainland created new centers of power that competed with Minoan merchants for control of lucrative trade routes. The Mycenaeans' more militaristic approach to international relations may have disrupted the peaceful commercial networks that had been the foundation of Minoan prosperity. The political factors contributing to Minoan decline remain poorly understood due to our limited knowledge of Minoan political organization. However, the simultaneous destruction of multiple palace sites around 1450 BC suggests either coordinated external attack or widespread internal upheaval. The fact that the palaces were not rebuilt after this destruction indicates that the social and political systems that had supported them had collapsed irreversibly. The transition from Minoan to Mycenaean dominance in the Aegean was a gradual process that probably took place over several generations rather than through a single conquest event. Archaeological evidence suggests that Mycenaean influence in Crete increased gradually during the 15th century BCE, with Mycenaean pottery, burial practices, and other cultural elements appearing alongside traditional Minoan materials. The final takeover of Knossos around 1450 BC may have been the culmination of this gradual process rather than its beginning. The Mycenaean administration of Crete, as documented in the Linear B tablets from Knossos, shows both continuity with earlier Minoan practices and innovations introduced by the new rulers. The basic structure of the palace economy, with its emphasis on centralized control of agricultural production and craft manufacturing, remained largely unchanged. However, the Mycenaeans introduced new administrative practices, including more detailed record-keeping and possibly different systems of land tenure and labor organization. The cultural blending that occurred during the transition from Minoan to Mycenaean control is evident in various aspects of material culture. Pottery styles combined traditional Minoan decorative motifs with Mycenaean vessel forms, creating hybrid styles that reflected the mixed cultural environment. Religious practices also showed syncretism, with traditional Minoan deities and rituals being integrated with Mycenaean religious traditions. The post-palatial period of Minoan civilization lasting from approximately 1450 to 1100 BCE, was characterized by political fragmentation, cultural change, and gradual decline. The centralized palace system that had coordinated Minoan society for over 5 centuries was replaced by a more decentralized system of smaller settlements and regional centers. This fragmentation may have been a response to the collapse of the palace system, with local communities organizing themselves for survival in a more unstable environment. The settlement patterns of the post-palatial period show significant changes from earlier Minoan practices. Many sites were fortified for the first time, suggesting increased concern about security and warfare. The famous site of Carfi, located on a remote mountaintop in eastern Crete, represents a typical post-palatial settlement with its defensive location and simple architecture. The choice of such remote and defensible locations suggests that the peaceful conditions that had characterized earlier Minoan civilization had given way to a more dangerous environment. The material culture of the post-palatial period shows a general decline in quality and sophistication compared to the palace period. The fine pottery, elaborate metalwork, and sophisticated artistic productions that had characterized Minoan civilization became increasingly rare. This decline probably reflects both the loss of the centralized economic systems that had supported specialized craft production and the reduced resources available for luxury goods in a more fragmented and impoverished society. The religious practices of the post-palatial period show both continuity and change compared to earlier Minoan traditions. Traditional sacred sites, such as caves and mountaintop sanctuaries, continued to be used, suggesting that some aspects of Minoan religion persisted despite political and social changes. However, the elaborate palace-based religious ceremonies of the earlier period disappeared, replaced by simpler rituals that could be maintained by smaller communities with limited resources. The population of Crete during the post-palatial period appears to have declined significantly from the levels reached during the palace period. Many settlements were abandoned entirely, while others were reduced to small villages. This population decline may have been caused by various factors, including warfare, disease, economic collapse, and emigration to other regions. The reduced population would have made it difficult to maintain the complex agricultural and craft production systems that had supported Minoan civilization. The final collapse of Bronze Age civilization in the Aegean around 1200 BCE was part of a broader pattern of collapse that affected much of the eastern Mediterranean. This late Bronze Age collapse saw the destruction of the Mycenaean palaces on the Greek mainland, the fall of the Hittite Empire in Anatolia, and the abandonment of many cities in the Levant. The causes of this widespread collapse remain debated, but probably included climate change, population movements, internal social upheaval, and the disruption of trade networks. The Sea Peoples, mysterious groups of maritime raiders who appear in Egyptian and other Near Eastern records during the late Bronze Age collapse, may have played a role in the final destruction of remaining Minoan settlements. These groups, whose origins and identities remain debated, attacked settlements throughout the eastern Mediterranean and contributed to the general instability that characterized the period. Some scholars have suggested that refugees from the collapsing Mycenaean civilization may have joined these raiding groups. The effects of the late Bronze Age collapse on Crete were severe and long-lasting. The remaining settlements were abandoned or drastically reduced in size, and the island entered a dark age that lasted for several centuries. The sophisticated artistic traditions, complex administrative systems, and extensive trade networks that had characterized both Minoan and Mycenaean civilizations disappeared, not to be equaled again in the Aegean for many centuries. The Dark Age that followed the Bronze Age collapse was characterized by population decline, economic simplification, and cultural regression throughout the Aegean. The magnificent palaces of both the Minoans and Mycenaeans were abandoned and gradually buried under accumulated debris. The art of writing was lost, and the complex social hierarchies of the Bronze Age were replaced by simpler tribal organizations. This period represents one of the most dramatic cultural collapses in human history. The preservation of Minoan sites during the Dark Age was largely accidental, resulting from natural processes of burial and abandonment rather than deliberate conservation efforts. The dry Mediterranean climate helped preserve organic materials that would have decayed in more humid environments, while the accumulation of soil and debris protected architectural remains from destruction. The result is that many Minoan sites preserve remarkable details of Bronze Age life that would have been lost under different circumstances. The memory of Minoan civilization was largely lost during the Dark Age, surviving only in fragmentary form in later Greek mythology. The stories of King Minos, the labyrinth, and the Minotaur preserved some awareness of Crete's ancient importance, but these mythological traditions bore little resemblance to the actual historical reality of Minoan civilization. The Greeks of the classical period had no knowledge of the sophisticated Bronze Age civilization that had flourished on Crete more than 1,000 years earlier. The gradual recovery of Greek civilization during the Archaic period saw the reestablishment of trade networks, urban centers, and complex political systems in the Aegean. However, this new Greek civilization was quite different from its Bronze Age predecessors, with different languages, religious practices, and cultural traditions. The continuity between Minoan civilization and later Greek culture was limited, mediated primarily through the Mycenaeans, and preserved mainly in mythological traditions. The rediscovery of Minoan civilization in the modern era began with the pioneering work of Sir Arthur Evans at Knossos in the early 20th century. Evans' excavations revealed the existence of a sophisticated Bronze Age civilization that had been completely forgotten by history, revolutionizing understanding of European prehistory and establishing the Minoans as Europe's first advanced civilization. The impact of Evans' discoveries extended far beyond academic archaeology, capturing the public imagination and inspiring new interest in ancient history and archaeology. The romantic image of Minoan civilization as a peaceful, artistic society living in harmony with nature appealed to early 20th century sensibilities and helped establish archaeology as a popular field of study. Museums around the world began to acquire Minoan artifacts, and the distinctive Minoan artistic style influenced contemporary art and design. The naming of Minoan civilization after the legendary King Minos was Evans' idea, and it has remained standard despite the fact that we have no evidence that such a king ever existed. The choice of name was inspired by Greek mythology, which described Minos as the ruler of a powerful maritime empire based on Crete. While the historical accuracy of these myths is questionable, the name Minoan has become firmly established in archaeological literature and popular culture. The decipherment of Linear B script in 1952 by Michael Ventris provided crucial insights into the final period of Minoan civilization and confirmed that Greek-speaking peoples had gained control of Knossos during the late Minoan period. This discovery revolutionized understanding of the relationship between Minoan and Mycenaean civilizations and provided direct textual evidence for the transition from Minoan to Greek control of Crete. The failure to decipher Linear A script remains one of the great challenges of Minoan studies. Despite decades of effort by skilled linguists and cryptographers, the earlier Minoan script continues to resist all attempts at decipherment. The eventual decipherment of Linear A, if it ever occurs, would revolutionize our understanding of Minoan civilization and provide direct access to Minoan thoughts, beliefs, and administrative practices. Modern archaeological techniques have revolutionized the study of Minoan civilization, providing new insights into previously unknown aspects of Minoan culture. Scientific analysis of artifacts has revealed information about trade networks, technological capabilities, and cultural connections, while environmental archaeology has provided insights into ancient climate conditions, agricultural practices, and human-environment interactions. The study of Minoan civilization continues to evolve as new discoveries and analytical techniques provide fresh insights into this remarkable ancient culture. Recent excavations have revealed previously unknown aspects of Minoan society, while advances in scientific analysis have refined our understanding of Minoan technology, economy, and cultural development. The application of digital technologies has opened new possibilities for studying and data, presenting Minoan sites and artifacts to both scholars and the general public. The legacy of Minoan civilization extends far beyond their immediate historical period, influencing the development of later cultures and contributing to the broader tradition of human achievement. Their innovations in art, architecture, technology, and social organization helped lay the foundations for the classical civilizations that followed. The study of Minoan civilization continues to provide valuable insights into the nature of human society and the factors that contribute to cultural flourishing and decline. The ongoing mystery of Linear A and the many unanswered questions about Minoan society ensure that this ancient civilization will continue to fascinate scholars and the general public for generations to come. The Minoans represent one of humanity's most remarkable early experiments in complex urban civilization, demonstrating the potential for human creativity, innovation, and cultural achievement even in the distant Bronze Age. Their story reminds us that the development of human civilization is far more complex and interesting than we might initially imagine, and that there are still many secrets from the ancient world waiting to be discovered. In conclusion, the Minoan civilization stands as one of the most fascinating and enigmatic cultures of the ancient world. From their humble beginnings as Neolithic farmers to their rise as the masters of the Bronze Age Aegean, the Minoans created a sophisticated civilization that rivaled any of their contemporaries. Their achievements in art, architecture, technology, trade, and social organization were remarkable for their time and continue to inspire admiration today. While many mysteries about Minoan civilization remain unsolved, particularly the undeciphered Linear A script and the exact nature of their political and social organization, the archaeological evidence reveals a culture of extraordinary sophistication and creativity. The Minoans' apparent emphasis on peace over warfare, their respect for nature, their artistic achievements, and their innovative approaches to urban planning and international relations make them a unique and inspiring example of human potential. Though their civilization ultimately succumbed to the various pressures that have destroyed so many ancient cultures, their legacy lives on in the civilizations they influenced and in the continued fascination they hold for modern scholars and the general public. The story of the Minoans reminds us that human creativity and cultural achievement can flourish under the right conditions, and that the ancient world was far richer and more complex than we often realize.